attending. Chad's online.
It's AI Chad.
Chat, it's a chat bot.
Good evening. I'd like to call our regular council meeting on Monday, February 24th to order at 6 p.m. I'm Mayor McNeil Smith. Colleagues in the council chamber this evening, to my far right, Councillor Steve Duck, Councillor Sarah Duncan, Councillor Scott Garnett, Councillor Terry O'Keefe. Councillor Chad Rantoul, good evening, is joining us online this evening.
Thank you. Good evening.
And Councillor Richard Novick is unable to attend tonight's meeting. Welcome to members of the public in the gallery this evening, or to those who might be watching the live web stream, and good evening to members of staff in attendance this evening. I want to respectfully acknowledge that we're holding our meeting, and indeed the entire town of Sydney is in the territory of the WSÁNEĆ Nations. We express our gratitude and respect for the WSÁNEĆ people who have stewarded these lands and waters for millennia, that is thousands of years, and we acknowledge their ongoing important relationship with the lands and waters today, and the importance of our relationship with WSÁNEĆ to steward these lands together, and want to acknowledge the Sayote Nation, the Sartlip Nation, the Pakwachin Nation, the Sycam Nation, and the Malahat Nation. In turning to approval of the agenda, we do have some changes since the agenda was published last Thursday afternoon. We have additional items of correspondence. They are a letter from Anna and Russ Hudson regarding the budget, and that will go under item 13A. And then we have four items of correspondence with regards to the ECOM 911 dispatch, what we are referring to as the downloading of that cost to 10 South Island municipalities. And the correspondence, council did receive on previous agenda correspondence requesting a meeting with the Honourable Gary Begg, MLA, Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General. We did have a meeting, a virtual meeting with the Minister. Included in this evening's additional correspondence is a thank you letter to the Mayor of North Cowichan, who led that meeting, and then the Minister's response to us on January 28th, and then a follow-up letter and then a subsequent letter from the Minister, and then a letter from the 10 mayors to Premier David Eby requesting a meeting. We will discuss those items of correspondence when we come to that portion of the budget. So there are those additional 5 pieces of correspondence. The 6th piece of correspondence is I'm bringing forward a notice of motion this evening. That is towards the end of the agenda, and that was circulated to council, and that will become part of our agenda going forward. And lastly, change is Councillor Duncan has requested providing a verbal update on the Mary Winseburg Centre. That will go under item 11C. With those changes, I would ask for a motion to approve the agenda as amended. So move. Sorry, Councillor Garnett.
Sorry, Mayor. I think there's one other piece of correspondence under 6A.
I'm sorry if that's correct. Thank you. And sorry, we do have an item of correspondence just received with regards to the development, consideration of the development approval under item 6A. So with those 7 items of correspondence and the addition of a council report, I look for a motion. Moved by Councillor Duck, as amended.
Second.
Second by Councillor Garnett. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, that carries. We're now turning to the regular public participation period in our council meeting, where members of the public are invited to come forward and address council for up to 4 minutes. We ask that you provide your name, the municipality you reside in, and the agenda item that you are speaking to this evening. And for a first time, I'll call if anyone wishes to come forward. Good evening. We do have a little button at the bottom of the mic to activate that. You'll see a red light come on.
Good to be here again. Thank you very much. I'm part of the Murray Weisenberger, and I live in wonderful Sydney here in the Landmark building. I meet with a bunch of people, there's 7 or 8 of us, and maybe once a month or so. And today's meeting was talking about the Farmland Foodlands Trust item with the CRD. And I think there are some issues on it. I'm disappointed that the thing had moved ahead already. I think certainly better planning and more transparency. I, who sort of keep a mild look on these things, didn't know it was coming up at all, which is my problem, not anyone else's. I'm willing to agree. So too much bureaucracy in amongst the meeting. That took up almost 2 hours of our meeting, just a general idea around it. So lack of transparency was one of the big issues. Too much bureaucracy and a lack of details in how it's going to go forward and for how long the funding was served. Those were kind of the issues that had come up. So normally I don't like to take anything negative to bring to you folks along the way, but that seemed worthwhile. North Sanchez, I think, meeting about their pickleball courts, and most of you know that I am an amalgamationist at heart here. And so it would seem reasonable if they happen to go ahead with that maybe Sydney consider making some small contribution to the road effort up to that, being as we all live on this peninsula together. I volunteer at Brentwood Music in the Park. I live in all 3 municipalities here, and I think we'd be better all as one. One more thing, I'm hoping that you folks will take seriously the housing issue and make that point to our friends in North Saanich. Certainly Central Saanich has done a whole lot on this. Sydney has done a whole lot on this. North Saanich has yet to do anything. We got to share that load too. There's a lot of people working at the airport. North Saanich has to do its part. That's it. Thanks. Have a great evening.
Actually, I'd just like to respond briefly, and thank you for coming forward on the 3 items you brought forward. On the first, with regards to the Foodlands Trust, I think you are aware that the CRD board did give final approval to the bylaw. However, while it is a topic of discussion, it's still a topic of discussion among some, I would be happy to meet with you and others offline to describe it further, in some of the details you might not be aware of.
I'll do that, thank you.
With regards to housing, we do take housing very seriously in Sydney, and I would want to be cautious and not suggest that our council or myself would be making recommendations to another municipality on a particular matter.
Just a thought in my amalgam portion that, we all do live here together.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the remarks on pickleball as well. I'll call for a second time anyone wishing to come forward. Please come forward. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Rob Pringle, and I live in Langford. I'm here to speak to item 6A, the development permit and development variance permit for 9895 and 98997. Just wanted to thank council for the second chance at this opportunity. Hopefully it shows in the proposal that we've listened and made the appropriate changes, both you and the APC. And then I just wanted to note that I'm here if there's any follow-up questions that you guys may have. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward this evening and attending. And I'll call for a third time if anyone wishes to come forward. And we do have a person online. Thank you for catching the microphone there. Good evening, Mariah O'Brien. If you would like to connect, and I will turn the floor to you for 4 minutes. We'll just let you unmute there. There we go. Still another click. There we go.
There. Okay. Thank you for providing this opportunity for residents to give input during the budget process. My name is Mariah O'Brien. I'm a resident of Sydney. This week, to ground my perspective on Sydney's expenditure planning, I've gleaned information from the town's 2024 Housing Needs Report. Its detailed financial data is from the 2015 census. Old, but it shows trends that are still evident and growing in both staff's opinion and in the media. The trends for Sydney are towards older, average age residents and smaller households. Sydney's maintainers, the StatsCan term for people who pay the bills for each household, are grouped in 4 categories: solo or roommate, solo parent, families with children, and 2-person families. In Sydney, 39% of the households were classified as solo or roommate, and they had an average income of $40,000. 28% of Sydney's households were classified as two-person families, and they had an average income of $80,000. Thus, in those two categories, we have 70% of Sydney's maintainers. However, with those income levels, 22% of Sydney's maintainers met the government criteria for having unaffordability in housing, which is that more than 30% of their income was required for their housing alone. Incidentally, Sydney's percentage of households with high unaffordability rates is higher than other CRD districts. Many people in the town in the two most populous StatsCan categories, solo or roommate and two-person families, total 67% of Sydney's maintainers. Many of them are retirees living on a fixed pension. The town's proposed desire to draw nearly 14% more from each of them when water and sewage are considered is not viable. We already have a situation in Sydney where the Lions Food Bank is stretched to its limit by a constantly increasing usage, a large part of which they say is due to the needs of seniors and young families. The CPI, Consumer Price Index, is now stabilizing around 2.5%. 14% needs to be reconsidered. 2025 is not a time for any new project spending. My list of cuts includes the things that might be lovely in sound economic times: a new town hall, a warm pool in town for arthritic seniors, a second cycling corridor through Sydney, very close to the CRD's well-maintained trail, but within the town limits. These things are not appropriate now. It's true that many of the town's proposed expenses are expenses that are being downloaded from BC to its municipalities. That fact, as well as the likelihood of expensive ecological damage, the looming prospect of a global trade war, and other conflicts that are in the offing due to the erratic world stage behavior of Trump's America and Putin's Russia. The context of the world we live in now only makes the need to tighten our local budgets greater. Sydney has many citizens who remember World War II. We see the parallels. This is not the time for excess or wastefulness. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for taking the time to speak to us this evening. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You too. Turn
And I'll call
myself
for
off.
There we are. I'll call for a final time anyone wishing to come forward. Seeing none, I'll close the public participation and thank everyone again. We're now turning to item 4D1, which is a presentation on a proposal for a Lest We Forget crosswalk. I'm pleased to welcome Kenny Podmore and Ryan Trelford to this podium this evening from the Branch 37 Royal Canadian Legion.
I'm sorry?
From Branch 37 Royal Canadian Legion.
That's correct. That's correct. Mr. Mayor, members of council and town staff, it is my honour to be here as newly elected first Vice President of Branch 37, the Royal Canadian Legion, Saanich Peninsula. And I'm also honoured to have with me our newly elected President of the branch, Ryan Trelford. Sydney has always been very, very supportive to our veterans and local military, not only by our residents, but the staff here at the Town Hall, but also our dedicated parks and recreation staff. With this in mind, I come before you to propose that the town further that support by the installation of at least one remembrance crosswalk. You will see from your notes that this was first done back east by a town named Belleville. It has proved to be so successful and powerful that more are being restored. The colours of red and white represent the Flanders field poppies, where they grow and grow. And if I just may show this to the audience, this is what we're looking at, and also at the bottom there's a silhouette of a fallen soldier. It is without doubt a truly beautiful way to remember our Canadian men and women who gave so much to give us the lives that we have today. In respect of a possible location, if successful in this proposal, ideally in the vicinity of the cenotaph would be wonderful, but I do also understand this may not be possible with possible changes taking place along the James White Boulevard. However, I'm not an engineer, but with the possible changes, could the two crosswalks at the front of the town hall be consolidated into one, therefore the crosswalk being directly in front of the cenotaph? As I say, I'm not an engineer. I don't know whether the existing crosswalks eventually would be moved from the four-way stop, but that's my thought. This crosswalk is not temporary. It would always serve as a permanent reminder, but it also would be an incredible way of educating our young people in a way that they will also remember. It would be so special for our wonderful little town of Sydney, which, as you know, I'm very biased, to be the first on Vancouver Island to install a remembrance crosswalk with so much meaning. My hope is that this proposal is successful and that other islands will follow suit. How amazing that would be for our town. To me, with everything else that is going on in our world today, there is no better time than this to go forward with the crosswalk proposal. Canada, friends of everyone, enemies of none, will always remember. And this year, coincidentally, is the 80th anniversary of victory in Europe, which resulted in the end of World War II. Mr. Mayor, members of council, we must always remember them, lest we forget, lest we forget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kenny Podmore. We appreciate you coming forward this evening and the information you included in your package for the presentation. And I will turn, given this is a presentation, I will turn to colleagues if there are any questions. We do have a recommendation from staff, but I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Not seeing any. Thank you for describing it and the motivation.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would turn to a member of council to consider the staff recommendation. Councillor Duck.
Yes, and I would like to move the recommendation that I so move that we refer this proposal to staff for report back to council.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to the movers.
Nothing to add.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm in support of the motion. Just one thing I would recommend to staff when they're doing their review to consider accessibility aspect. And so there was a similar crosswalk, I think, well, not like this one, but I don't know if it was a rainbow one or some other sort of crosswalk that was put in, and it became an issue for people who have visual disabilities. So it's not that it couldn't be put in, it's just I believe that there needed to be more specific demarcation between the lines for people with visual impairments. So I'm not sure of the details, but I'm just heads up to cover that aspect off.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah.
We won't look for, I will turn to Ms. Clary.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Staff have reviewed the Ministry of Transportation's guidelines on the accessible walkways where crosswalks such as this, and as long as there's the white parallel bars,
Right.
they meet those guidelines. So we have looked into that and we'll make sure it
Yeah.
meets those.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. I'm in favor of this going forward. I would say first adjusted crosswalks. The first thought that had come to my mind was actually the one that goes from, well, I guess there might be a bus stop and a change there, but the one that goes to the Mary Winseburg. It's a longer crosswalk, but I thought it was appropriate because there is the statue that's in front of that, and we know that that'll stay in place even if things change with the town hall, as is in the budget. I also just know that because the Mary Winspear is having to change their constitution, that the references to it being something that was put in place to remember fallen, or I guess just soldiers and wartime, has been taken out of the Constitution. The CRA will not allow them to have that in because it doesn't have anything to do with charitable status. More on that in my council report. So I feel this is a way that we could kind of put that back in as part of the center's purpose. So, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. We appreciate that context. Not seeing any further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? That carries unanimous. Thank you, and thank you again for coming forward this evening. We don't have any bylaws under number 5 on the agenda this evening, so we're turning to number 6 under development permits and variance permits. And under 6A, we had development permit application number DP 100848 and development variance permit application number DV 100368 at 9895 and 9899 7th Street. To relax requirements for maximum projection of cladding into setback areas, maximum parking area, and location of 3-bedroom units in order to allow the form and character of a 4-story multi-unit residential development. This has come before council. Council did direct for notice to go out to neighboring residents. We did have one submission which was received earlier on the during agenda approval this evening. That was from Anthea McLaughlin. And we do have a recommendation. I will turn to council. Councillor Duck.
Yes, I'd like to move the recommendation that the development variance be approved and the development permit be approved, subject to the conditions as per resolution 2025.06.043.
We have that moved.
Second.
And seconded by Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to the movers. Councillor Garnett. Not seeing any discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? That carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're next turning to, I'll look for a mover for the approval of our regular council, minutes from our regular council meeting in February 10th, moved by Councillor Duck.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Garnett. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Not seeing any, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. That carries. We don't have any business not completed at a previous meeting or rise and report from in camera or mayor's report. We're turning to council reports. We have 3 this evening. I'll begin with Councillor Duck with a verbal report from the South Island Prosperity Project.
Thank you, Chair. Just to give an update to my colleagues on what's happening at the South Island Prosperity Project. They're in an engagement process for their new strategic plan. They're moving into sort of phase 3. This started with the local leadership day in November and will be followed by a series of events, 2 of which are open right now, which is a public survey, so anybody from the public can respond to the survey just in terms of what SIPP is doing. That's up until the middle of March, March 12th. The stakeholders involved in SIPP, that's all the municipality members and First Nations and businesses, are also invited to complete a stakeholder survey, which again is due in on middle of March. This will then be collated with the information gathered, and the SIPP board will meet over 2 different meetings to develop the new strategic plan, along with the focus groups. They'll be working with the different stakeholders, including, I believe there'll be one out on the peninsula. There will also be focus groups with the First Nations, and the idea is to bring this all together with a document to be presented at the annual general meeting in the middle of June. This will come before the Municipal Partners Committee before that meeting, so we'll have a preview of that. Following acceptance of it at the AGM, the idea is then to take the strategic plan out to the different municipality members and see what the feedback is relative to that that strategic plan in the early fall, with the idea of implementation in April of 2026. Obviously that coincides with the new agreements with the municipalities and budget accordingly. I'm open to questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Councillor O'Keefe.
Not really a question, just a comment. I appreciated reading the report that you submitted, and I think what was valuable was looking at the millions of dollars that SIPP has brought into the community, the increase in jobs and that sort of thing. So, you know, quite often I get questions about what is SIPP good for? You know, how are we getting value from them? So I thought there was some good information there and clearly showing the value that I think they're bringing to our regional economy in the South Island. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, we have received that, and we will now turn to Councillor Duncan for her two verbal reports. The first regarding the CRD Regional Water Supply Strategic Plan, and there is an attachment.
Yeah, thanks. So I've included this in here for members of the public who may view this video or be watching. Now the CRD is doing their strategic plan. They're soliciting public feedback as they do each time we do the update. And we know that we've had some feedback over the past little while because there's a $1 billion water treatment plant update on there, and quite a lot of expensive long-term works, as well as the DCCs, which are, you know, causing a lot of debate as we go back and forth on which things will be needed going forward, especially as we've realized that construction costs seem to be going up, and obviously recent events with tariffs, fuel prices, things like that are going to be a problem. So getting as much feedback from the public as we can and having people actually look at that plan will be very important. We've also heard from people now. Mr. Weisenberger came forward about the Foodlands Access Trust, and we know that a lot of work went on at the CRD board with that, and then by the time it comes out, people feel it wasn't transparent and there wasn't a lot of engagement. And so once again, as many people as can get in front of this and see it ahead of time will feel that they've had some input. And hopefully by the time the strategic plan comes forward and we actually finalize it again, we'll feel better about the public being aware what's happened. So that attachment has the link to go to fill out the survey. It will be up until the end of March. And if anyone has questions about the strategic plan and the public survey.
Turn to colleagues. I'm not seeing any. Please continue.
Okay, so the other update was about the Mary Winseburg Center, and at long last they are going to be getting their charitable status back. It has been a valiant struggle with the CRA to get that paperwork done. So on March 10th they'll have an AGM to ratify the new constitution, which has the very specific wording that the CRA has demanded. And so that will be a change that I think, I know Ms. Warner will probably be walking the public through who attend about the wording and the purpose of the Mary Winseburg Center, according to this. From the CRA's perspective, really has changed. Obviously from the Mary Winseburg's perspective and the services they will actually be providing and the way they can receive donations, absolutely the same. But it will appear different for people who are there. They've taken out the purpose being to honor veterans, and now it's just about the fact that it's providing these services to the community. So they're going to be looking, I think, at ways to make sure that their original purpose in the community remains, as well as purpose for the services they provide. The financials will be coming at a later date. The CRD Performing Arts Committee, they've been in discussions with them about performers to come and reviewing them for as a venue, but of course they're running into difficulty because we do not contribute. So I will try and stay on top of that and see how they work out with the CRD, how they will best be using the Mary Winseburg Center and making sure that we still have artists who are able to come, and how we fit into the greater regional strategy. They have also fixed the outside lights that were the town property. The town has fixed those for them, so there's better lighting outside and better security cameras. If anyone has questions about that, I will try to follow up. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Yep.
Just wanted to find, you mentioned the annual general meeting for the presentation on March 12th. Do you have
10th.
a time? Oh, March 10th.
Hold on.
Do you have a time?
I believe.
'Cause
Yeah, we did not have a time yet.
Okay.
So that'll go out. If people are members, it'll be posted, and it'll be posted at the, on the board that's inside the Mary Winspear Center, but they did not have a time at the time.
So that meeting will be open to the public, correct? Because we had a number of questions, just so that
Yeah.
that information's out there.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? I have one question I'll put through to Councillor Duncan, and that is, did both the Memorial Park Society and the Saanich Peninsula, or sorry, the Sancha Foundation require reinstatement of charitable status, and will both be occurring?
The Memorial Park Society did I think they both did separately, so the foundation that has the funds that are separate, my apologies because I'm new on the board, hopefully I've been saying it correctly, or not new on the board, new as the liaison. The funds have been there, they've been able to collect them. That I think went through earlier, that they were able to get their charitable status because it did not require a constitution change for that. And so right now it's just getting the Mary Winspear, or the Mary Winspear Society back into their charitable status, so they can access the funds that were still there and be able to operate that way. So,
Well, thank you for the update with the good news on the reinstatement of charitable status. Well, next, so that completes the council reports for this evening. We're turning to item 12A under committee reports, which is the Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee. We're receiving the minutes of their meeting from January 23rd. I'll turn to our representative on the committee, Councillor O'Keefe, if you wish to comment on the minutes or take us through the recommendation.
Sure, yeah. Before I make the recommendation, I'll give a little background about what that's about. So council may recall that last year SPAC brought a recommendation to this, to all three councils about coming up with a standard for EV parking. So that when we put EV parking in space, that there's some provision made so that they are accessible for persons with disabilities.
Sorry, I'm just going to pause for a moment.
Okay.
Are you speaking to the motion?
Well, I'm trying to provide some background as to why it's coming here. Or do you just want me to?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, you can, if you want to provide that while the motion's on the floor, that's.
Okay,
that's
sure.
appropriate.
So I'll move that the EV parking standard would apply to EV parking that is available to the general public and in multifamily residential developments.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Please continue.
All right, so we had brought that motion here, council supported that, and then I think it was a few months later that staff came back when we were reviewing our action items list, and that had been on the action items list, and staff's understanding was that that had been already covered off through our parking, another parking study, or parking actions that were going to be taking place. And so there was, what was meant to happen is that the standard was not just to apply to public parking spaces, but parking spaces that are open to the public. So for example, the way this came up was, you may recall that over where the Red Barn was established, there was a whole bank of Tesla EV parking, which is great, but none of them were accessible. And so when committee members brought that to SPAC, it was identified that there is no standard, although we have standards to say an accessible parking space needs to be this wide and this long and that sort of thing. We don't have such a standard for EV parking spaces. So this is meant to clarify for staff that what we're looking for is something that applies not just to our online on-street parking, not just to our town of Sydney public parking places, but it would apply to any place, say Save On Foods, multifamily dwellings where there is parking available to the public.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to the seconder.
Only to add that, yeah, I remember when we were putting the new multi-EV station over by the community safety building, that was an issue, so it's good to see that coming forward. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just also clarify that when we had this discussion at the last SPAC meeting, members of our staff were there, Mr. Newcomb, and so they helped us craft the motion, and he seemed comfortable with this motion going back to staff with that clarification.
Thank you. Just a question of clarification. I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole first. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to clarify, I haven't heard the word or reference to charging station. So by my recollection, is this not related to parking at a EV charging station? This is a question to the mover.
I'll put that question through to Councillor O'Keefe.
Yes, that is the intent.
Okay, I only asked because it doesn't reference that in here, just as EV parking. And
Okay.
Nor in your comments did you refer to specifically, I guess, the accessibility aspect of being able to, you know, use the charging device. So it's as much about parking as, I guess, access to the device, the charging device in accessible parking. But if that's the intent and that's clear to staff, then I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you. That was my question as well, Councillor O'Toole. And I'll just put a question through you, Councillor Duncan, or through to staff. So this is EV charging parking. So we're seeing a proliferation, an improvement of the number of EV charging in parking spaces. So does this motion mean that everywhere there is an EV charging, that they will be accessible? Councillor Duncan?
O'Keefe?
Or Councillor O'Keefe?
But you can answer if you want. So what we were asking staff to is to come forward with a policy to identify what they think would be reasonable. So the committee didn't come up with any ideas in terms of how many EV charging stations there should be in a certain area, just to do that research and come back with whatever their recommendation would be.
Okay.
With-
If comfortable,
with-
if staff helped craft this, you know, during the meeting, I'm comfortable with that. I prefer to see the word charging in there. I think that's, but
Okay, I guess it was assumed that electrical vehicle means that you're gonna be charging it, but if staff require that clarification, we can add that in.
thank you. I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. I see perhaps Mr. Newcomb may wish to speak to that. I'm not sure if he was at this meeting. Perhaps he may. Thank
Good
you.
evening, Mr. Newcomb.
Good evening, thanks. I think staff's interpretation of this recommendation was that when we look at updating the off-street parking and loading bylaw in the future, that we would look at the accessible parking regulation as well as look at the EV charging parking regulation and see what the opportunities there are for looking at ensuring that a portion of accessible parking that's provided through the bylaw are electrified for EV charging. So the exact sort of context and how that would happen in practice, we haven't got there yet, but I think the idea is review that requirement in the bylaw and bring forward hopefully a reasonable solution to ensuring that, you know, there's a reasonable number of electrified accessible parking spaces.
Thank you. Appreciate the clarification. And so it would take effect once the bylaw was the off-street loading and parking bylaw was amended.
That's correct, yeah.
No, thank you. Appreciate the clarification. Thank you, Councillor Duncan. So, Councillor O'Keefe, any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. We're now turning to item 13A under staff reports, our 2025 to 2029 financial plan. And I'll turn the floor to our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Hicik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are at step number 2 of probably our most difficult budget process in my time, my 19 years here. But I believe we are ready to meet this challenge, and I'm going to take council through this second meeting tonight. So tonight's agenda will include a very brief recap of where we stand. I will introduce some of the newer concepts in the staff report that's on the agenda, and I will perhaps delve into some of the supporting information that you might have come across in your review of the budget binder. Following the initial recap and discussion of the staff report, I would recommend that we go through first consideration of the budget by the different areas, starting with supplementals, moving on to capital, perhaps general operating, and finally the utilities. So as mentioned, we are at step 2 of our 3-step process. So we introduced the budget 3 weeks ago. We've had an extra week to review the materials and consider the impacts. And we are here tonight to discuss and clarify various parts of the budget, to have our first in-depth discussion and questions prior to our hopefully final deliberations at the next meeting. There is an opportunity for public input, and there was a fairly extensive staff report on the agenda, which I hope you found useful. We will follow up in 2 weeks' time with an updated version of the draft budget that is based on any direction from tonight's meeting. The goal for that third meeting would be for us to approve the financial plan. If, however, additional meetings are required, we can schedule those at the next meeting. So we all know by now where we are starting this time around. It is at a unique tax impact of over 10%, which has not been the case in the town since at least around the year 2000, shortly after the RCMP building was added. In that year, we ended up at 9.8%. I'm not sure what the starting point was, but this is most definitely the largest starting point in my time here. And we're all aware by now of what the reasons are. And we have known for some time that this was coming because of the cuts we made in the pandemic year. So included in that 12.85% are several new budget items, including supplementals, as well as some tax-funded capital. And the significant factors were highlighted at the last meeting and also in the staff report. As we go through this process tonight, we will identify some of the areas we can focus on as we work through it systematically in potentially reducing that opening impact. But it's important to note that we've been deferring tax increases since the pandemic, and deferral is no longer possible. We are at the point where we have to act decisively. So we saw this last time around, showing what the 12.85 means to the average residential taxpayer. It would mean an annual increase of $230 or roughly $19 a month. So why we are here, and that's one of the main focuses of the staff report, and just trying to outline and remind council of what's happened over the last 4 or 5 years that brought us to this point. So as mentioned, it started off with the tax reduction in 2020 due to COVID. We had initially approved the budget with a very small increase, which we then reconsidered and rolled back. And in addition to bringing the general tax increase to 0, we cut business taxes by 10%. So in addition to the tax reductions in 2020, another important factor is the extraordinarily high inflation that we've seen in 2 of the last 3 years. In addition to that, we have seen an ongoing need to increase services over the last 5 years, especially in protective services, that being RCMP and fire first responder. Finally, the Canada BC Safe Restart Grant, it was a blessing and a curse for reasons stated, and we'll cover that in more detail tonight. So in 2020, we reduced our level of property tax revenues by approximately $576,000, and that was a combination of the general increase being rolled back and then the reduction in commercial. So while reducing the revenue side, we did not, however, reduce the expenditure side, which stayed at the normal level required to provide the expected level of services. And we knew at that time that we'd have to make up the lost tax revenues over time. And then we were lucky enough to receive that substantial Safe Restart Grant in 2020, which gave us more time to phase back to a full revenue level. But at the same time, it also gave us the luxury of deferring those tax increases. And the cumulative Safe Restart funds that we used to make up for lost taxes amounts to over $2 million, which equates to a tax impact of over 15%. So expenditure levels have kept increasing to fund the existing and new services that have been added since 2020. The existing increases I speak of are mainly related to the high level of inflation, and the new services are internal and external demands for additional funding. So each and every year we require some level of tax revenue growth to keep up with our costs. And every time we fund part of that revenue requirement with something other than taxes, we are deferring a tax increase. And eventually those deferred taxes have to be made up, and we have reached that point. So as mentioned, expenditure levels have continued to increase over the last 5 years, but on the revenue side, tax increases were minimized. We used what I call mitigation measures instead, made up mostly of Safe Restart funds, which are now all used up, as well as additional draws on surplus, which has now fallen below minimum policy levels. This is a version of the table in the staff report showing what the mitigation amounts have been since 2020. So largely it's made up of Safe Restart. So roughly in year one, that $550,000 of Safe Restart essentially made up for our tax cut. And then in the year 2021, we did it again. We took a similar amount and made up once again for that same level of lost taxes. And it has a cumulative effect. And we did it again yet in 2022. 2023 we're running out, so a smaller amount. And in addition to that mitigation type, we also drew on surplus a little bit more every year since 2020 to the level of $395,000 last year. So if you look at the line in the table that is labeled tax equivalent, that shows how much the mitigation funding would have been as a tax increase had we not had that mitigation funding in place. If you look at only the Safe Restart portion, it's a little bit lower. And the reason why I split that out is because we have a lot of discretion as to how much and how quickly we make up our depleted surplus. So the actual tax increase in the table is shown in bold on this slide. So in 2020, it was 0%, and in fact, it was a tax cut. 2021, we instituted a tax increase of 2.7, followed by 3.76, and it's only in 23 and 24 that it actually was higher than our norms. And that was largely because of the impacts of inflation. So the bottom line on this slide is what the tax increase should have been if we weren't using mitigation funding instead. This is a slightly different representation of the same information. So it shows the amounts in blue are mitigation revenues, and the amounts in green are tax increases. So you see that between 2020 and 2024, we used a fair amount of mitigation funding rather than tax increases. And now in the 2025 portion, you see that our mitigation funding has gone way down, and tax increases are the only way to make up the difference. Mitigation now is simply more use of surplus, which we are continuing to deplete below policy levels. So this is a little exercise I undertook after the report was written, just showing what it would have looked like if we had added 3% tax increases every year since 2021 through 2024. So you see that the actual tax increases would have been 3% higher, but we would now be facing a 7.44 tax impact rather than 12.85. But if you look back to 2024, we would have seen a 9.04 increase, which may or may not have been considered palatable by council. But had we done that additional 3% tax increase each year, we wouldn't have been depleting our surplus to the level that we have, and perhaps more of it would have been available last year and this year to help phase in the increases a little bit over a slightly longer time frame. But hindsight is 2020, and we're always under pressure to come in at the lowest possible tax increase. And indeed, in 2021 and perhaps 22, staff and council might have been still concerned about the impacts of the pandemic and not wanting to increase taxes unnecessarily. So we did put it off. And further to that, we have to keep in mind the purposes of Safe Restart funding, which were to make up for pandemic-related costs or to make up for lost revenues. And had we increased our taxes over the last 4 years, it would have been hard to say that we had lost revenues for which Safe Restart could have been used, and we might have had to pay back some of those grant funds unused. So we did the best we could, but now we have reached the end of that mitigation, and we have to take action. This is a slide from the first presentation, just a quick reiteration showing where we are on a 5-year basis. So we're looking at a fairly substantial increase now, a fairly healthy one in 2026, although closer to the norms. And the more we reduce this year, the higher next year's would have to be. And any costs that we're not yet aware of for 26 would add on to that 6.88% projection. So as we covered last time, there are no increases built in 27 through 2029 to start making up for surplus depletion. That's a question that we'll consider as part of next year's budget or shortly thereafter. Another slide from last time, just to quickly reiterate that taxes are 2/3 of our general operating revenues, and that's why they have such a big impact on our revenue needs. So if we're short of revenues, and we've looked at some of these other measures to the extent we can, we're left with taxes as a final resort. And this is a slide that we're also used to over the last couple of years, showing how we have to have a balanced budget. So our general operating expenditures are just over 25 million, and that is funded by a combination of other revenues, as we saw on the previous chart. Property taxes make up 2/3 of it, and surplus funding this year is a fairly healthy draw of $831,000. This is the status of our surplus, with the orange line showing the actual balance, whereas the blue line shows where our policy minimum should be, were we keeping up with it. So we have fallen underneath that minimum as of 2021. And there was a report to council in January about the status of surplus and recommendations that we can continue to use it over the next 2 years to mitigate the tax impact, but then reconsider that policy afterwards and come up with a plan to replenish. A brief word about some of our major cost impacts. So this illustrates that policing costs have gone up. Well, they have more than doubled over the last 16 years, even though we've only added 2 officers to our complement. So it went from 1.182 million in 2009 to over 2.4 million for our CMP officers only. This does not include the cost of police dispatch, which we are beginning to incur this year. Our community support funding has, in the last 11 years, also doubled, and now it makes up 7.3% of our net operating budget and is over $1.2 million. So if we are looking to budget reductions, the most likely sources for that would be capital projects that are funded from taxation, although there aren't very many of those. So if we're able to replace some of those with other funding, which I've already attempted to do before bringing you the budget, or if we're able to defer or cut certain tax-funded projects, that would be one source of reduction. The other would be tax-funded supplemental items, which are built into the 12.85. So anything that is reduced, rejected, or deferred would serve to lower the impact for this year. In the past, we've talked about reducing transfers to reserve as a budget reduction, but I'm sorry to say that there really aren't any discretionary transfers left to reduce. Anything we reduce would compromise our ability to fund capital through non-tax means, both this year and in future. And commonly, I would bring up the idea of using more surplus, but that is really off the table now because of where we are. So a quick reminder, each 1% reduction costs us $147,000 of projects, and each 1% has an annual impact of $18 for the average household, or $1.49 a month. So the question might come up, why are we not considering the operating budget for a reduction? And that's mainly due to the use of surplus funding to balance the budget. So just looking at the base level of $250,000, which I'm comfortable with, we use that to minimize the tax impact and covering expected savings in the operating budget. So if we reduce the operating budget, I would not be comfortable with not also reducing the amount of surplus we use to balance it. Therefore, I'm really not considering the operating budget for reductions unless you wanted to start looking at eliminating or curtailing some services. That's the only real option if you wanted to go there, is service reductions. So that essentially concludes my opening update, and I propose that we go through the budget in the following components, beginning with supplemental requests, moving on to tax-funded capital. Then other capital, we'll take a quick look at general operations, and finally the utility budgets. So each one of these sections, I would like to take you through 2 or 3 slides as an opener, and then open it up to council questions and resolutions. And I'm hoping that any changes we make to the budget tonight are by resolution. If we're not at the point where we're comfortable making those reductions, perhaps we can just have discussions and then defer a final decision until the next meeting. But in some cases, resolutions will be appropriate and may be voted upon, and those will be built into the next draft of the budget. And I'm wondering if there are any general questions before we dive into the first of those sections.
Thank you for that for that presentation, Mr. Hicik. I do have one question, and that is, speaking with CAO Edwards earlier this afternoon and receiving those 4 items of correspondence with regards to ECOM 911, that is a significant tax impact. I know it was on a separate slide in the presentation last meeting, but I just, whether it's now or whether it's sometime later this evening, I would like to turn to, I don't know if you have a slide that shows that, that particular tax impact, but then provide an opportunity for Mr. Edwards and or myself to comment on the correspondence we received from the minister.
There is one of the supplemental slides that will show that. I believe it's the, we'll be breaking it into one-time 2025 and then ongoing 2025 and then future year supplementals. So that one would be on the second slide.
Okay.
If you wanted to deal with it at that time, that's great. Or if you wanted to deal with it ahead of time, that's
Well, if it's going to come up on the slide, then I think that's great.
okay.
Councillor Garnett.
Mayor, sorry, not a question to staff, but is there a way that Councillor Rental can be on the screen so we know if he has questions to ask?
I feel like if I raise my hand, I probably pop up. Do I not?
No.
My electronic hand, I mean.
There you go. Okay.
Okay, so I'll just do that. Thank
Okay.
you. Then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so supplemental requests we know by now are one-time or ongoing additions to the existing service levels, like studies, new staffing, new programs or services, or higher levels of service on existing programs. And as mentioned earlier, all of the supplementals that we're going to be looking at have been built into the proposed tax increase, so approving them does not mean more taxes, just rejecting them means less. As mentioned, we'll consider them in 3 components. First being the 2025 one-time requests, moving on to the 2025 ongoing, and finally future years. And similarly, any preliminary changes or reductions could be in the form of resolutions. And just for reference, supplementals begin on page 13 of your binders. So the one-time requests for 2025 are a little more lengthy than they were last year, and they include 2 items that span 2 budget years. And we'll open it up to questions at this time.
Sorry, questions on any of these one-time requests?
Yes, please.
I'll first turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have one question, and it's to do with the demolished building at 3rd Street Park. And it's, I'm just wondering, there's something I've come across is, have we heard of a company called Lighthouse Circular Innovation? They're a Vancouver-based company that works on the island, and they repurpose houses that are to be torn down and circle them back into the development community. And I'm wondering if that's something we might be able to pursue to decrease the costs for potentially not even having to demolish, or demolish less and remove less of the houses on that property. If that's something we could look into to drop the price of that potentially.
I'll look to staff if they have a comment.
The idea to potentially have it moved has come up, but it's not in the kind of shape that it could be easily moved as is. Perhaps components.
They move components that
Okay.
they match with people that are building in various communities to salvage stuff from the landfill.
We did have an environmental assessment of the building, so we'd have to keep that in mind,
Okay.
but we'll look into it.
Okay.
And can't be, nothing moved can be too big without bringing
Yeah.
down all the trees in the middle of the driveway.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Going to the Rose Garden fountain improvements and the tennis courts.
Take one at a time, Councillor.
Okay, well, Rose Garden, they're both sort of the same thing. So my understanding is that we could conceivably take that out of our community amenity fund.
Conceivably, yes, but our amenity fund is trending towards the red end of things, and if we were to use more of it now, we would run out quicker without it being replenished through new amenity contributions. So that is, I think the use of amenity funds is outlined in your binders, and if you were to find one or both of those items from that source this year, it means something would have to be reconsidered in a future budget year.
Okay, and I guess, so just so I'm just looking at the reserve balances that we got. So it looks like the amenity reserve, we're starting with about 1.1 million, not anticipating any contributions. So are those contributions that we would get from the development community for the most part?
Future contributions, that's the only source, yes.
Okay, and so there's a number of developments in progress, but I presume that we wouldn't include or project amenities until things actually move forward and those things came in. Is that?
The only ones we collect amenities on are where there's density bonusing, and
Right.
I will defer to development services staff if they're aware of a pending application that might include such a contribution.
Ms. Verhagen?
Thank you. Any amenity funds received are collected at the time of building permit, when a building permit is paid for. So we don't know when that will happen. Some of the developments council approved in 2024 included amenity contributions because of the bonus density that was proposed, but we don't know what the timing is on issuing those building permits, so this money isn't guaranteed yet.
Okay. Yeah, okay, thanks for that. So, and then I see that we're planning to use 117,000 in 2025, and then we're left with a balance of just over $1 million then for this year. Is just wanting to clarify my understanding of what we currently have.
Yes, funds remaining at the end of this year are projected to be over $1 million. Same next year. We have a couple of more substantial uses projected for 2027 and 2028, at which time we will probably be close to zero without an influx of more funds.
Okay. So if I wanted to propose that we take those items from the amenity fund, would I do that now, or we prefer to deal with motions later? Just wondering about preferred process.
While we're on a particular discussion, sorry, you're speaking with the Rose Garden Fountain and
The Rose Garden
Garden
improvements. And I would, whether we want to take, I guess, I was also going to speak to the Rest Haven Park Tennis Court surface repair
Okay.
as well,
So-
but whether
so-
it's better to take them
Yeah.
separate.
let's stay with Rose Garden Fountain and Rose Garden improvements, and thank you for bringing it forward in your questions and the response from staff. I want to turn to any colleagues. Do you have any questions with regards to those two items from staff? Okay. So yes, it would be appropriate if you wish to move a motion. We would look for a seconder, and we can have further discussion, or we can have discussion.
Okay, well, I will move then that we fund the Rose Garden Fountain of 20,000 and the Rose Garden improvements of 5,000 from our amenities fund.
Do we have a seconder?
Second for discussion.
Councillor Rintoul has seconded it for discussion. I'll turn back to you, Councillor O'Keefe.
Sure.
For
So,
motivation.
So if you look at our reserve balances at this time, as Mr. Hicik has confirmed, that after we've accounted for the amounts we plan to take from the amenity fund in 2025, we still have a balance of $1,044,000. And that's without any additional amenities that may come in from the various projects that we have approved. So I understand the comment about, well, if we use it now, we might not have funds for later. But I mean, it seems to me community amenities are there for the community. This is something that is needed now. So I don't see a problem with something that it seems to be well used and appreciated, and spending the money now, and if other things come up later, well, then we'll deal with it at that time. But this is something that is eligible to be taken from the fund. We have very few places in the budget where we can reduce the tax impact. So this seems to be an easy one, at least, to propose.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul if you wish to motivate.
Thank you, Mayor. No, I concur with Councillor O'Keefe's comments. I'll support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to other speakers. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I won't support the motion. I'm looking not just this year, I'm looking forward the full 5 years of the plan, and I have concerns about where the balance is heading, and we don't know what's going to happen in the next 4 years. So we may need this money for something else, something that might be more important. And if this is the way we pay for it, I think they are important. But my whole view of the budget has been in terms of the whole 5 years, not just this year, as large as the increase is, because I have concerns around where some of our balances and reserves are heading. And I think that could be really dangerous for us in the future, or future councils, as they try to navigate this world we're currently living in with potential tariffs and counter-tariffs. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
I will support this motion. We did receive a couple of letters from the public who have looked at our budget, and these were specific to the Rose Garden, so I think it's important we do keep it in. And I think paying for it now through the amenities fund is paying for it now. We have that money available, and without any tax impact on our residents. And as Councillor Garnett's just pointed out, we're going to have to find places we take it away from elsewhere. This was two that we received support for, so I'd like to see it at least funded, and I think the amenities funding will do the job. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. It's Councillor O'Keefe. I'll just wait to see if there's any other first-time speakers. I'll speak myself in support of this. While staff have accurately stated that while we do have projects that council has approved, we haven't yet issued building permits, but there are projects with amenity funds to come forward in the future. And I think Mr. Hicik, you indicated, and I'm sorry, I'm not on that page, what the amount of the amenity fund was projected to come out. I think you said the same amount in 2026? As issued?
That's correct. Well, we should be just over $1 million after both years, and then 2027 is when the big projects are slated. So.
Yeah, so I'm comfortable. I think we have room, and sitting here at this time next year, we'll perhaps know better on those particular projects and the timing of the amenity funds coming forward. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. I'll just ask you to verbalize Councillor Rintoul as I'm calling the question. All those in favor?
In favor, yes.
Opposed? Councillor Garnett is opposed. The motion carries. Councillor O'Keefe, you had the floor.
Sure. So I'll move along to the tennis court improvements.
Microphone, sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Rintoul. So I will propose, I will move that we fund from the amenity fund the Rest Haven Park tennis court surface repair of $7,000.
Councillor O'Toole seconds. I'll turn to the mover and seconder.
Same reason. This is something that is well used and needed. If you know any tennis players out there, it's hard to find good courts to play on these days, and they're competing with the pickleballers as well. And I think, again, this is something, it's not a big amount, but it's something. We have very few places in the budget where we can take out tax items and use them from one of our funds. And another thing that's in my mind is I understand the comments about we're heading into potentially a tough time with tariffs and that sort of thing. And so I think it's things like this that we should be making sure that the community that we're living in, there's some good things out there for people to go and enjoy. While we're struggling with tariffs and potentially recession, community amenities are meant to make our community a great place for people to live. So things like tennis courts, people get a lot of use out of that. So I think it's worth taking it out of that fund to reduce the tax impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Toole?
Nothing further to add.
Councillor Gurnett?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to clarify, I do think these are worthwhile endeavors, and I think we should do them. I just don't agree with the way we're choosing to fund it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duncan?
Yeah, thank you. I have ambivalence about using it as well, just simply because I know Mr. Hicik and our staff do try to point out the ones they think are the best. On the other hand, sometimes I suspect they give us some things to chew on just so it looks like we've done something. But I appreciate that Councillor O'Keefe is looking for these savings. I also appreciate that the projects that she's looking at are ones that are outside the town core. And I know that we have the projects that are coming up will be amenity contributions, typically tend to go towards the town core, and the amenities that they typically tend to fund are then something that goes to around where they are, which is, I mean, partly as it should be. If you're affecting a neighborhood, you should contribute to it. But it does mean that in our town, which is very compact, that some of the amenities that are slightly outside the core, such as the Rose Garden or these tennis courts, which, you know, we don't have downtown, are used by people who live in the core as well. And I think this kind of is something that I can justify as it's helping to redistribute some of those amenity funds that we already know have been collected from previous projects back out towards other areas of town.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Any further discussion? Seeing none, ask you again, Councillor O'Toole, to verbalize. All those in favor?
In favor.
Opposed? Councillor Garnett is opposed. The motion carries. Councillor O'Keefe, did you have another item?
Not necessarily another item yet, but question through you to staff about the civic site analysis. Yeah, looking for, refresh my memory on what I know we're going to be doing engagement, and I guess my feeling at this time is that knowing the environment that we may be heading into, concern about whether we will even be in a position to consider building a new town hall. And so I'm trying to recall what we're going to be doing in that analysis, and whether there might be a way to target it towards maybe a renovation, or are we just seeking public input in terms of what they want to see there? Is there a potential to kind of scale it back before we get too kind of down the road in planning?
I'll turn to Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the councillor, we're very far from getting into any detailed and expensive planning. This is essentially to enable us to do very preliminary, high-level work. But a portion of this budget request will go to that analysis of looking at this current facility and costs to renovate this facility to make it more accessible, more efficient, and a better use of the space. And that alone will be at a minimum of 10, perhaps towards $20,000. And so, again, we're just really at the very beginning stages of looking at opportunities and options for this project. And so, but without this budget line item here, we wouldn't be able to begin those types of analyses and that type of work.
Okay, yes, thank you for that. I guess what I'm just pondering is it worth us spending the whole 50,000 to do kind of what you're talking about in terms of renovation, or whether we go out to the public first to find out, is this, to get their input first, to find out, is this something that they would support? Or whether you feel we wouldn't really have enough information to go out with them, to them with.
If I might interject first for a moment, Mr. Edwards. Council, this is a strategic, is in our strategic plan. It has been for a number of years. Given the municipal property that is involved, it is an in-camera item. And I think some of the information that might be helpful, Councillor Keep, might be more appropriate in camera. So we can go to closed if we want to seek that advice from the CAO. But I think the nature of your question is bordering on some discussion that occurs in camera.
Okay, I'll just leave it at that for now.
I'll
then.
turn to Mr. Edwards.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with your advice there. I would just add, though, that going out to the public with a simple question of, do you support a renovation or a new location or anything like that, without any due diligence or any costing, even at a conceptual level, I think would be a disservice, because we wouldn't be able to provide any meaningful information in that question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, fair enough, thanks.
I have a follow-up question to that, and that is in the inner binder with under civic site analysis, it indicates it is anticipated that engagement with the public will begin this year based on options developed with the consulting professionals. Do we anticipate costs associated with the public engagement this year in 2026?
We haven't contemplated what those costs would look like, but if the project were to advance from those initial discussions and engagements, then we would be looking to add that to the 2026 budget. And we don't have an estimate of what that public engagement cost might be.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hicik?
I would just like to add to that part of the consultation we're paying for will be to develop concepts for that engagement. So we do need to spend some money to get there. And also you might have noticed that there are a couple of capital projects related to the town hall in future years of our 5-year plan. And what we're hoping to do is to avoid those by accelerating our plans to either renovate or rebuild. So those are in there as a placeholder, and if at all possible, we won't incur those costs. But things like replacing the boiler, drainage improvements, and so on, are the longer we put off this analysis, the more likely those large costs are going to be upon us.
Thanks, Mr. Hicik. I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole.
Thanks. I'm ready to move on to another item if you're ready, Mayor.
Yes, thank you. I'll turn to colleagues if there's another item. I have one question, or a question on one item, and that is the Talista Park washroom valve replacement at $2,500. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this given its amount, but why is this not considered routine maintenance, and why is it appearing as a supplemental? I mean, what happens if we don't replace it?
If I may, Mr. Chair, This is related to the portion of the staff report that talked about the parks budget increases over the years, and that the way we've been making do and accommodating some of these small items without asking for more funding. So this is a way to address that, to just show that there's these little things every year that have to be done that can't truly be accommodated within existing funds. And we bring it forward because we think it's something that has to be done. Now, is it something that can wait a year or two? I'll have to defer to my colleagues.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, you're quite correct. We would, in fact, if it didn't get approved, we would probably take it out of our operation budget and just go over on that. That's kind of the trend that's happened over the past few years with the aging infrastructure. Those washrooms are quite old. We did a surface restoration on the floors a few years back that just came up based on the sanitation issues that we were having at the time, the complaints from the public. It was too late to get it in the budget deliberations, and we absorbed those costs through our operating budgets. So again, as Mr. Hicik's just trying to point out, that we just want to inference some of this older infrastructure that we have does stretch beyond our operating budgets from time to time.
Thank you. I'm going to turn back to demolishing the building at 3rd Street Park. We've, through a councillor question to staff outside of the meeting and through a councillor question during the meeting, staff have indicated that they might look to consider other options. We're here tonight and 2 weeks from now to consider whether to approve this in the budget or not. Is this something staff can explore before our next budget meeting, our budget meeting in 2 weeks, to provide further comment? I'll turn to Ms. Clary.
Through to you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we'll definitely look into the firm that Councillor Garnett mentioned, and we'll look into other options. But we have considered the potential. We do have Nickel Bros fairly close, and we're aware of the types of homes that they are able to move, and we don't think this would be a suitable house for that. However, we hadn't heard of it was Lighthouse that Councillor Garnett brought up, so we'll definitely look into that.
Thank you. I'll turn to colleagues if they wish to raise any other items for discussion. Councillor Duck.
Yes, I'd like to move the removal of the review of library services, and I'll motivate if I get seconded.
I'll look for a seconder.
I'll second for discussion.
I'll turn to the mover and seconder.
So I think this is an item, I know we're doing this in conjunction with the District of North Saanich, so it may require some collaboration with them on moving forward or deleting this. But as our recent council liaison report indicated, we're getting pretty good service for the money we pay, and we'd actually be paying more if we went into the Victoria system. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's being the case. As the library services are continuing to evolve and change, access to the library, like myself, is predominantly done online, and I'm just not sure that we're going to, in the review of library services, we're going to gain anything, because I believe this is an evaluation whether we'd stay with VERL or go to GPVL. And I'm just saying maybe at this time that review is not necessary, but again, it would be a joint discussion with the District of North Saanich. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to the seconder, and then I have a question through the staff.
No, I have nothing to add. The rationale from Councillor Duck makes sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you. My question through to staff is that given this is a shared service with North Saanich, is North Saanich contributing a similar or same amount in this process at this time?
They have their own budget for it, and I believe they looked to us for a projected amount, and they'll be including a similar amount in theirs. So there could potentially be some economies in doing it together, but we've never really gone out to look for what a consultant on this kind of thing would cost, and we're taking our best guess.
Thank you for that clarification. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
I won't support this motion. I believe this has been in our strategic plan for last term as well as this term. And if we are to move ahead with potentially changing library services, it would need to be, I believe, by a referendum in the 2026 election. So if we were going to go down that road, we need to be getting this done in the near future. So I won't support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll speak in opposition to this. While I appreciate the motivation, this has been, as our strategic plan, as Councillor Garnett said, since towards the beginning of the last term. And one of the things that we've been waiting for is for the ducks to align, if you will, as a shared service with North Saanich. And North Saanich at this time is prepared to bring it forward to their council and to move forward together. And I think the point with regards to library services changing, whether it's due to technology or otherwise, I think that's actually a rationale for the first time in 25 years. I believe it was the last time was in the year 2000 or thereabouts that a review of library service was done, and that there may be opportunities with the other service. I'll leave my comments there. I'll look for any first-time speakers before going into a second time. Councillor Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I realize it has been in our strategic plan for a while, and we've put it off a number of times. When I look at the environment that we're in with the pending increase, budget increase, the biggest that we've seen as far as long as I can remember, tax increase, and what's coming down the road, is this the best, is $20,000 a good use of taxpayers' money? And I can't say that it is. I haven't heard from anybody in recent times saying that, you know what you got to do? We want a review of our library services. It's just not something that I think the public is screaming for. What they are screaming for, I think, is for us to look for ways to cut back on the budget. And, you know, maybe there might be some opportunities to go with another service, but I don't think at this point in time that I want to spend $20,000 of taxpayers' money on something that might be better. From what I hear, people are satisfied now, so I'm happy to leave things as it is. And if sometime in the future we hear from people that we need to do something about this, maybe I'd reconsider, but I'm happy to let this one go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I respect the motivation. I have a question through to staff, or sorry, yes, first a question through to staff, and that is, and forgive my memory, is review of library services remaining in the draft strategic plan?
It is in the approved 2025 strategic plan.
Okay.
It's not draft.
No, it is draft out for public engagement and coming.
Oh, sorry, you're right.
Coming back.
My apologies. Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, Council, I think just be aware of what would occur. Again, if a recommendation was to come forward for a change in review, it would require a referendum. So, I'm not saying we take the decision tonight. I'll certainly respect Council's decision if this is removed from the budget, but then we should continue. We should consider, will this remain in our strategic plan as we complete that process this year, and have conversation with North Saanich as well, because we're probably looking at another 4-year cycle before this would transpire again. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question on removal of review of library services. Those in favor?
In favor.
Those opposed? Councillor Garnett and myself, the motion carries. Councillor Duck, did you have any others, or does anyone, colleagues have any others? Councillor Rintoul, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that template for CEO performance review be removed from the budget.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. I'll turn to the movers, please.
Yeah, thank you. We have had, of course, a CEO review process that Council has been party to over certainly the duration, my duration on Council, and I'm sure well beyond that. I can appreciate there may be a desire for a more formalized process or an updating of that process, and that hiring a contractor to develop a template for future use may be one means of accomplishing that. I'm also inclined to think that there are likely, through colleague municipalities, opportunities to use tools that they may have in place just through our existing network of municipal counterparts, that I would think that a performance review template could perhaps be procured operationally or developed internally more cost effectively. I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to the seconder, Councillor Duck.
Nothing to add. Thank you, Councillor O'Toole, for explaining it so well.
Further discussion, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'll support the motion. However, I will say I think it is important that we come up with a more formal process than what we have had, I think, for a CAO performance review. Having said that, there are some tools, I believe, that we've looked at in the past. I don't know if it was Local Government Management Association or some municipal organization that put out a booklet in terms that had templates and that sort of thing. So I don't want to lose sight of this because I think it is something that we should do, but it's hard to justify $10,000 expenditure when we're under such a tight budget, having such a tight budget year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
In favor.
Opposed? Councillor Garnett is opposed. The motion carries. I have a question with regards to the electronic data and records management system. My first question, as staff have spoken to this in previous years, can staff say has there been previous budget assigned to this? I see that there's 30,000 this year plus 70,000 next year, but have we already incurred expense in this process? My understanding it has been.
Yes, we have. The initial budget was approved about, I want to say 6 or 7 years ago, and we got off to a very slow start, and we still have 30,000 of that remaining to supplement what we're asking for. So yes, it has been considered before, but not to the scope that we are considering now.
So the cost would actually be the $30,000 that we still have, plus this 30,000 plus 70,000 next year?
That's right.
And if all of those monies were spent, at what time would that record system be in place?
Mid-2026.
Okay, thank you. Do colleagues have any other items they wish to speak to? Seeing none, I'll ask you to continue, please, Mr. Hicik. I would suggest that we not approve the remaining one-time requests this evening, that we leave that for further consideration at our next meeting.
Point of order?
Yes, Councillor.
Could we take just a short recess?
Let us recess to 7:45, please. Thank you. Councillor Rentoul, we're just a couple of minutes early. Are you ready to join us?
Thank you, yes.
Thank you. We're all back in the room. So, Mr. Hicik, I'll turn the floor back to you as we reconvene.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the second component of our supplementals, being the 2025 ongoing requests, and you'll notice that police dispatch is on here with zero cost in 2025, and that's because this year's cost of $331,500 is proposed to be funded from a surplus so that we reduce this year's tax impact. So next year, which is the full year of costs, is projected at $460,000, and that's when it would have a tax impact. You mentioned earlier that you wanted to discuss this item, and that would be a good time.
Thank you. I'll turn to Mr. Edwards if you would like to speak to the correspondence we've received in the process over the last few weeks, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'll take the correspondence back a little bit farther to December. And so since I arrived here in September, this has been a critical issue for staff working with 9 other municipalities on the south of Vancouver Island that are affected by this issue. And in the more recent months, it has really ramped up where the 10 municipalities of which we're part of have really increased the level of communication back and forth with provincial staff, including ministers and now the Premier, to try to make our concerns understood and make our voices heard and to get some resolution on the issue. And essentially, just as a quick refresher, it was about in 2020 when the province decided to move away from the provincially operated RCMP call center dispatch here in the region and move towards a different service provider model, which was going to shift to Ecom, which is a company that's based out of the Lower Mainland, and all of the Lower Mainland municipalities use their 911 dispatch services through Ecom. And at that time, the 10 municipalities, or the South Island municipalities, weren't isolated on the island. The original proposal was that the entire island was going to move to this new Ecom model. However, for reasons beyond me, it was decided that it was only going to be the South Island, and the North Island would remain a RCMP-run call center. But we were told that the existing funding model to support the dispatch would continue to remain in place, whereby the provincial and federal government funded 100% of the 911 dispatch call center. It was only a couple of years later, around 2022, that it became fully clear to the 10 municipalities that that wasn't the case, that the dispatch service costs would be transferred entirely to the municipalities, and that the federal and provincial government were not going to fund it anymore. And however, at that time, the transition to Ecom had already occurred and was well underway. And so there was very little opportunity to change course and direction. The province did acknowledge that there needed to be some transitional funding to support those 10 municipalities impacted, and did provide 100% transitional funding in a incremental process, 1 year at a time. And they did provide us with notification that that funding would expire at the end of March of this year, and that as of April 1st, we would be required to pick up 100% of those dispatch costs. And so since December of 2024, those 10 municipalities, the mayors and CAOs and CFOs, have been working diligently to try to impress upon the province to maintain the transitional funding until such time that it could be a more equitable distribution of the service costs to all of the municipalities that receive this service. It feels inequitable that the South Island municipalities have been sort of isolated in this transition to e-com without other municipalities coming on board. The more municipalities that participate, the greater the economies of scale and the less the financial impact on us. If one of the 10 municipalities, for example, were to pull out of the program, then that would increase the cost of the others. So we've been requesting the province to maintain that transitional funding until such time that there could be greater equity throughout the province. And then additionally, the province is conducting a third-party review of e-com as a service provider, because the governance and financial model for e-com is I'm trying to think of how to put this delicately, but is perhaps under strain, and there perhaps needs to be more transparency and accountability. And so the province has been suggesting that they're looking into the matter by doing this third-party review. However, we're of the belief that we should wait until that review is complete before we're saddled with those costs and we have a clear understanding of what the new governance and financial models might be for e-com. And at the very least, we're looking for the maintenance of the transitional funding, not necessarily to carry on that the provincial government maintains funding in perpetuity, but rather maintain the transitional funding. So the most recent letter back from Minister Begg, the Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General, unfortunately declined our request for those for that transitional funding to remain in effect, and as such, we have written a letter to the Premier asking for the Premier's involvement in this issue, and that was sent just last Thursday, and so we have yet to receive a response, and we'll continue to also lobby until we get some clarity about it. So at this time, we've been provided with a draft contract from e-com to sign for this service, and which would then clearly indicate the need for us to pay for that service. However, that draft contract was flawed in several ways, that none of the 10 municipalities are comfortable signing it because of the flaws and the financial impact that it presents. And so while I don't have 100% certainty on this, it's my understanding that the 10 municipalities' intentions are to not sign the contract and therefore not make the payment as of April 1st to e-com for those services. However, from a budgetary perspective, we do need to be cautious, and we do want to ensure that we have a budget appropriation if necessary, but rather than apply that to the tax base, we feel it prudent to use surplus for this year, given that there's still a glimmer of hope that we may be able to avoid the full cost impact in this year. However, you see it show up in 2026 as a tax impact, because we do believe that regardless of what happens this year, it will become a full taxable service as of next year.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. I'll begin with Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. That was a great summary, and I learned a few more bits that I didn't know before. You mentioned that in the event that one municipality would pull out, that would increase the cost for others. So I didn't, is that even a possibility? I thought we were required. So is there an option to say, no, we just don't want to, we don't want to do this, we want to do what we were doing before?
Not really. Unfortunately, Ecom now has a monopoly in this game, and we don't, unless we were to take that service on ourselves and create a dispatch service ourselves. There are multiple different dispatch models throughout the province. The city of Nelson, for example, manages its own dispatch, but that would be a very expensive proposition for an individual municipality to take on themselves.
Follow-up, if I may. So is it still the case, though, that the northern part of the island is using the RCMP dispatch? So is that still an option that we could hop on board that service?
The province would not allow us to become part of that service, and in part, they would struggle from a capacity perspective because they have a staffing model that supports the North Island population and call volume, but wouldn't necessarily be able to support us joining them. If we were able to turn back the clock and we had clarity on what the funding implications were going to be, we would have advocated earlier to maintain the previous model that we had.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Looking at the page, the slide that's up there now, you've indicated a number for every year for 26, 27, 28, and 29. Are those numbers reflected in the general increase percentage that exists on page 8, or are they not?
Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you for the question. Well, thank you for that thorough update. I just have to say, as one of the mayors, because it happened in the previous term on December 10th of 2020, when we were, the 10 mayors were startled to learn through a call that this was coming, and that there was transitional funding provided for the years 21, 22, and then by subsequent request, further transition funding was provided in 23 and 24. The province has not acted as we requested to look at, for example, a cell phone levy, a call levy which is in place in other provinces and which is still part of our request at this time, which would significantly help in terms of funding this as it does in other provinces. But I'll leave my comments there, and just wanted to be sure that council was aware of the latest information correspondence that's just been received late last week. I'll turn back to you, Mr. Hicik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If there are any other items that council might want to inquire on this slide, now would be the time, or we can move on to the last one.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So I have my eye on a couple of things. The downtown sidewalk repairs of 25K.
Sorry, that's not there.
Oh, it's not.
That's gone. That was acknowledged as a mistake.
Oh,
and,
sorry. Okay. So we'll go to then the additional thermoplast in high pedestrian areas of 15,000. And I know from what I understand from staff earlier today is that we could potentially fund that through the alternative transportation fund, but there's concern that there's other things that we need that fund for in the future. So I guess my first question is this something that potentially could be covered through alternative transportation fund?
That fund is going to run out a lot quicker than the amenity that we were looking at, so we would not recommend it. It's been suggested that we could take it from our annual funding for accessibility improvements, but that would just use up too much of that budget and leave us unable to take on additional work in that area.
So in looking at the alternative transportation fund, I see that we've got 291,000 roughly allocated for this year. and then the ending balance is 96,000. And so what you're saying is that 96,000 is already allocated for projects in future years, is?
As it stands right now, we would be down to 65,000 next year, 32,500 the year after, and then all used up by 2028.
And if you could just remind me how we fund that.
That is through payments in lieu of parking, with half of that money going to off-street parking and half to alternate transportation.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that.
Did you have another item, Councillor Keith?
No, but I'll try this anyways, despite staff's concern, that the additional thermoplast and high pedestrian areas for 15,000 be funded through the Alternative Transportation Fund.
I'll look for a seconder. I'm looking a second time. I'm not seeing a seconder, Councillor Keith.
Second
Okay.
for discussion.
We have it seconded.
Okay.
I'll turn to the movers.
Sure, thank you. I understand staff's concern. Lots of things coming up for that fund. But again, my concern for this year is that this is an unusual budget year, and looking for areas where we could reduce the tax impact somewhat. One of the reasons that, multiple reasons while we're in this situation, but one reason is that we didn't have much growth in our tax base last year. And so that's a major factor. And what I'm more optimistic about, and say next budget year, is that we'll be in a better position in the next couple of years after we see the multiple developments come to fruition. So we've got White Birch on the road with however many units that is. Two major developments over on Beacon West, the big development with the Cedarwood on Lochside, and then the hotel as well. And so my thinking is, yes, it's a tough year because we didn't get the tax revenue that we normally get. So although we're taking, if we take this money now, it means that we'll have to, there'll be less in the future for other things, but I think our future looks better next year and the following year based on what I see coming up in terms of our tax revenue. So that's why I feel more comfortable taking this now rather than leaving it till later.
I'll turn to the seconder, Councillor Duck. Councillor Gurnett.
Yeah, I won't support this, and although I agree we do have things that are potentially going to happen, we also have an environment that may potentially not allow those to proceed. Costs could escalate quite largely depending on what happens in an issue of tariffs, and which can impact inflation, which could impact the borrowing capacity of developers. So a lot of these projects, although they will provide funds to the town, there's no guarantee they'll go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor of changing the funding source? Opposed?
Opposed.
Councillor O'Toole, Councillor Doug, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Gurnett, and myself, the motion is defeated. Councillor O'Keefe, did you wish to continue?
No, not at this time, thanks.
Thank you. I'll turn to colleagues if there's any other items for discussion. Sorry, that is the total of the items, is it? Or I'm just comparing it with the list in the binder.
The total for 2025 is 344,000. Not including the dispatch, which is alternatively funded.
Okay. Councillor O'Toole.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. A question through you to staff. Just refresh my memory on the annual grant, the ArtC grant administration. I recall they were in recently and had, I think, capacity issues in terms of meeting their able to fulfill awarding grants as sort of intended or anticipated. And I think the request at the time was that we continue to support the program, and included this $3,000. Did we pass a motion to refer that decision to budget? If you could refresh my memory on that, or if it was tentatively, I guess, approved at that time.
It was not a council motion. It was a request put forward by ArtC, which I bring forward at this time. I understand that they have improved their processes around getting the grant money out the door.
Okay, so this isn't grant money per se. This is in support of the administration of those grants, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so Chair, I'll move that the $3,000 for annual grant, ArtC grant administration be removed from the budget.
We have that moved. I'll look for a seconder.
Second for discussion.
Second for discussion. I'll turn back to you, Councillor O'Toole.
Yeah, thank you. Clearly not a lot of money. We see support for community endeavors in other areas of our budget. This one here is a supplemental request. I think kind of stands out in a sense. The organization has struggled. I know we certainly support their endeavors, and we do so by providing them money to grant, and then I think it's incumbent on them with their volunteer resources to provide the administrative services to fulfill the granting requirements. So I guess I'm just a little, I'm encouraging them to continue their volunteer work and build on their base to be able to support this without the additional financial encumbrancy on the town to support the administration. We provide the grant money. I think it would be beneficial if we could see them fulfill the grant program internally. I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Duck. Nothing to add. I just, Councillor O'Toole sought clarification to begin with, but my takeaway from that meeting that ArtC presented was that we were approving the reallocation of a fund from one use to another, not that it was coming forward as an additional budget request.
You're right, Mr. Mayor. The nature of their request at that time was for a one-time reallocation of previously provided grant funds to their operating budget to get them through some budgetary hardships. And this was a secondary request. So we used to give them this $3,000 for administration of the sculpture walk, which they discontinued, and they asked that it be redirected to assist them in better administering the future grant program.
So this request that we're looking at tonight came subsequent to them coming forward and council approving the reallocation.
It was roughly concurrent.
But this is the first time council's seeing it.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Keefe?
Yeah, thank you. My understanding was as similar to the mayor's in terms of they were not asking us for any extra money. There was money that they hadn't been able to put out the door. They were taking a portion of that to put towards administration. Some things I think that are worth mentioning is a reference was made to the community funding that we put out. Out of all of the groups that we provide community funding, ArtC gets the least. We give hundreds of thousands to the Mary Winseburg Center, to the Shaw Center, to the museum, and ArtC are the least, get the least amount of funding from us. In terms of, it should be their responsibility to get the resources to administer the grant. Going going back, when we first discussed the grant program going to them, part of the advantage for us is that staff didn't have to do this. So you may recall that when we did have this program, all the applications would come here. This is something that we would have to administer. So they agreed to take that off our hands. And when there's other such programs, such as the CRD that has a program for administering grants, they take 25% off, right off the top towards administration. So ARTC, who is already operating on a shoestring budget, has been administering this without any additional support from us. So $3,000, if that's all they need to help do some extra advertising and marketing to do this, I think it's a good investment. I think they were under the impression that this was coming their way, so I don't think it's, I'm not in favor of cutting back on this now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question on removal. All in favor?
In favor.
All in favor, yes. Oh, sorry, you're saying in favor. Thank you.
Yeah.
Opposed? Councillor Gurnett and Councillor O'Keefe are opposed. The motion carries. I have a question through to staff, perhaps Mr. Hicik or perhaps Chief Mickelson, with regards to increased compensation for overnight firefighters. The rationale was very reasonable for the increase in 2025, but I'm just now seeing it on this slide, even though it was in front of me in paper, that is increasing again in 2026 before then sort of plateauing. If staff could, or the chief could speak to that, please.
Yes, through the mayor, this year is less than 2026 because it starts it starts June 1st. It starts midway through the year, and then 2026 it shows the actual full cost of 12 months.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for missing that. Mr. Is
If I might add, the reason it's being brought forward yet again is we're trying to keep up with the increases in minimum wage, make sure that the volunteers are compensated above that level.
Thank you. So I'm turning to colleagues if there's any other item for discussion. Seeing none, I'll turn back to you, Mr. Hicik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That concludes the first component, supplementals, and we will move on to the capital portion. And once again, a very brief introduction.
Sorry, I just have I'll just pause for a moment.
Sure.
Councillor Duff?
Yeah, sorry, I thought we were finished with ongoing requests, and I have a question on a one-time request.
Please, if we could go back to...
I apologize. Just a question through to staff on the downtown parking study for 2026. Given this was done 3 to 4 years ago, what new information is going to be relevant enough that we're going to spend $50,000 to find? Thank you.
Through to Councillor Duck, it was a recommendation that it's done every 5 years. However, that could be delayed if that's council's wish. But it is a recommendation from the last study that it be done every 5 years.
I would then propose a motion to remove the downtown parking study from the 2026 budget.
Thank you. Just before we proceed, just a process question. I'm sorry, I'm trying to use the binder along with the slides. This slide here, we didn't look at previously?
My apologies. No, we should have moved to this slide instead of right to capital.
No, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Duck. And I'm turning back to you. Sorry, you've made a motion. I'm now looking for a seconder.
I'll second.
Second for second. I'll turn to the movers.
So, I mean, I understand through staff that it's done every 5 years, not quite 5 years, based on the previous study. Again, this is a large ticket item. This represents a third of a point of increase in our taxes. I don't know if there's been substantial enough change in the downtown area that we're going to find out new additional information from the downtown parking study to provide any value that we would see changing our progress. And I'm happy to be corrected for that by staff, just what will help us guide our parking management more succinctly if we had no significant changes in the downtown area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keith. Or, sorry, I'm turning to Ms. Clary, please.
Thank you. Sorry, I do want to clarify that the last parking study was initiated in 2021 and it came to council in 2022. So it will be 5 years after the study was initiated and the data was collected for it.
Appreciate the clarification. Councillor Keith?
Thank you. My recollection is that there's still a whole lot of action items to be completed from the downtown parking study. And my recollection from when we last talked about it was that we would consider putting this off. I wasn't too bothered to see it in the 2026 budget because I thought, oh, when next year comes around, we can say no to it then. But, you know, so I'm kind of ambivalent about whether we reject it now or next year. Having said that, if that was kind of where our thinking was anyways, it might be better to give staff that information now in terms of longer term planning to signal to them that this is something that we're just not interested in doing in 2026. So I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to first go to Mr. Hicik, then I have a question for clarification, then we're going to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If council doesn't want it as a priority in 2026, we would suggest deferring to a future year rather than removing it from the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Hicik. My question is these will appear as one-time requests when we're meeting at this time next year?
That's correct.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, good discussion. My comment would be I'd rather not see us, start drilling down on all the 2026 recommendations that are here. Like Councillor Keith, I think I'd like to see how things pan out when we're reviewing the 2026 budget to see if there's a latitude to be able to do it. So for me, it would just be premature to start addressing the 2026 budget lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just concur in that comment from Councillor Rintoul. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question on, sorry, at this point you're removing it, Councillor Keith, staff's recommendation, Councillor Duck.
I'm happy to withdraw.
Okay, the motion is on the floor, so it's on the floor now, so it's so let's leave the motion as it stands. We understand that if it's removed from 2026, that if that's successful, then we might give consideration to a future year rather than trying to amend it at this point. I'll call the question. All in favor of removal? Opposed? Councillor
Opposed.
Councillor Duncan, Councillor Gurnett, myself, and Councillor Rintoul. The motion is defeated. Are there any other items to come forward for discussion in 2026 or beyond? One time. Are there any questions with regards to this single ongoing request? The Vancouver Island Integrated Major Crime. Not seeing any discussion. Back to you, Mr. Hicik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With that, maybe we could move on to the capital budget, which begins on page 59 of the binders. Quick reminder, we have 9.67 million in projects included at this time. There will be roughly 800,000 more in carry forwards at a later stage. But for the time being, most of that is reserve funded. Also from the Canada Community Building Fund, some carry forward funding, but from North Saanich, utility fees. Only 156,000 of the capital program is funded from property taxes in 2025, which roughly equates to 1.05% tax impact. In terms of significant projects, we covered some of this last time. There's infrastructure replacement, other replacements, active transportation, several park improvements, and then there are 4 what we would call major capital projects that were outlined in the staff report. And I think this would be a good time if there are any questions about any of those capital projects that are outlined in that report.
Sorry, outlined in your staff report for this evening.
Yes. So I'm thinking of Weiler, McDonald Park Road, Kenora, and the CSB public education space especially.
Okay, I'll turn to colleagues. Are there any questions? Mr. Hicik has them up on the screen. Starting about the third one down. Councillor Garnett?
Just sorry, Mayor, I just want to clarify, if we have questions that are not related to those staff report items, should we wait till these ones are dealt with first?
Yeah, Mr. Hicik has just suggested that while these are up on the screen and we're part of the staff report, with that additional information, we consider them now.
Thank you.
Councillor Keefe, and then Councillor Duck.
Thank you. I'm looking at the CSB public education space. So just wanting to clarify more the source of funding. So there's, in the binder, I think it said 59,000 from somewhere, but I'm not sure what that was. But there was 65,000 that we had from forest fire contribution in 2023. So is there 65,000 from that and then this other 59,000, or is that the same thing?
Part of the original funding was the wildfire money, and we used that funding source for the costs to date in 2024, so it leaves about 44,000 remaining. We're kicking another 10,000 of that wildfire money into the increase for 2025. So we're only looking for 146,000 in additional funding from the community building fund.
Okay. So it's still funded from that forest fire money? And
Partially, yes.
Okay, that's, yeah, just trying to clarify that. That's fine, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck.
Yeah, further to that question through to staff, what happens if we shelve this?
Perhaps I'll defer to the chief.
Through the mayor to Councillor Duck, my concern with shelving this is the requirement will remain, and it will merely mean a $300,000 project today will turn into a $500,000 project in, subsequent budget cycles or the next council term. It was a cost engineering casualty that was ultimately unnecessary, and the scope probably would have been $100,000 to complete the building as designed at that time, and it subsequently escalated to 150 and now 300,000. So the need and the requirement to complete the project remains. It is fully funded by a combination of wildfire and the BC Growing Communities Fund. So my concern is if we do prolong or delay this project, the likelihood of it requiring tax-funded monies only increases, is not lessened.
Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Chief, and if I could extend that, maybe I need clarification on what the difference of this space would be relative to the existing educational space on the third floor.
Yes, again, through the mayor to Councillor Duck, the building was designed after exhaustive review with previous councils and looking at different buildings to incorporate that specifically for the public education space. The rooms upstairs were not designed to accommodate. They've just simply been utilized for that rationale. We would never purposely design a building to have a public education space on the third floor. Those are typically on the first floor to draw the public in and provide it for that reason. So it'd be contrary to the design of the building and the functionality. We'll make do, and we can continue to make do, but it's less than an ideal solution.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I'm just wondering how much of, I remember initially that there was talk of this was where the heritage engine was also going to be, and then that ended up not happening. And so I'm just wondering what permanent features would be in this space, or if there's a possibility to partner with the Mary Windspear and their display spaces, if there is, or if there's things that it's merely a matter of needing a space to set up for training initiatives, if something more temporary exhibits that can be moved around could be used instead. And some funding might be required for that, but some existing space might be able to be used.
Through the mayor to Councillor Duncan, yes, we've had considerable success with the Mary Windspear Center on occasion, but as you're aware, there's a number of exhibits and things going on there, so it's very transient, and we can only do it for short periods of time, particularly during Fire Safety Week or Emergency Preparedness or the Great Shakeout. Those are when we try to get in front of the public. The intended role for that space would be, yes, it may house a museum truck, but also would primarily be a site where not only fire prevention initiatives, whether it's smoke alarms or egress planning or the like, but also emergency preparedness activities, a sign-up kiosk for Santa Pencil Alert. These are all things that we would have, and you know, there'd be some displays and videos and all kinds of things like that that would draw people in to, again, provide for fire safety initiatives and emergency management initiatives. It's kind of a two-headed monster in that perspective.
Councillor Duncan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So how are we currently doing it? So I know that we do sessions about smoke alarms and other safety issues. How do we conduct those currently?
Yes, through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, at present, what we do is a bit of a hybrid. Depending, what we try to do is we pull a truck out and we'll do an ad hoc presentation in the bay floors. And we'll do that, but unfortunately that can be, it's functional and we do that, but you know, quite often the vehicle extraction fan's on and a number of things, so it's not ideal and set up strictly for that. But again, we're fully committed to, you know, proactive risk reduction, so whether we do it on the bay floor or if there's suitable space upstairs and there's no training or a CRD meeting or something going on in one of our rooms upstairs, we'll utilize one of our space upstairs and try to do it. But again, we adapt the best we can.
Okay, thank you. Just a follow-up question, maybe this might be maybe for Mr. Edwards. In terms of the civic or analysis that we're doing in terms of new town hall, do we currently have, I don't think we have a whole lot of training space here except for the room downstairs. So would we be incorporating in a new town hall or a refurbished town hall some space for staff training?
Mr. Edwards.
We haven't contemplated something akin to what is been designed or considered for the fire hall or the community safety building. But with certainty, there will always be a little bit of room or space that's used for staff training, but typically we would use a boardroom as a multifunctional room, but not a dedicated sort of training space or training room.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Any other item for discussion? Councillor Duck.
Yeah, just your first or second item there, other asset replacement plans. In particular vehicles, I see that we're projecting to spend about $1 million on vehicle replacement for 2025. Is there a way that can be deferred or changed? Do we have to spend $1 million this year, or is that just into the fund in preparation? Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Duck. When we review our vehicle replacements, we have a set length of time that we hold on to vehicles for, depending on the use, the level of service, the robustness, heavy-duty equipment, that type of thing. But we always reevaluate, and if we can push out a few extra years based on condition assessments, those types of things, we do that. This year we have both of our 5-ton gravel trucks are up for renewal. We've pushed those out probably for the last 3 years to get as much time as we could. Again, there were some supply chain issues in the past, and that's kind of what's happened is we've had to delay some of these vehicle replacements because of those supply chain issues, and it's all coming to head right now. The only nice thing about it is it's reserve funded that we're looking at. Again, those large trucks, those 2 large trucks with their snow removal accessories on there, the gravel boxes and that, they figure out to about $500,000 of that replacement budget. And again, we look for alternatives all the time. We do an interdepartmental memo every year to look at what we're going to push out, what we're going to extend the useful life of, and what we have to replace at that particular time. So it's just a crunch that's come out of the supply chain issues that we've had the last 3 or 4 years that have created this. But again, we've had those transfers into reserves to cover those costs. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Okay, I'm turning back to you, Mr. Hicik. If there's nothing further on this slide.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We will, a couple of slides of overview again. We saw this last time showing the beginning and projected ending balance of all our reserves. And then I've got 3 or 4 slides showing how going into every budget, people put in their project requests, and then it falls on me to look for every possible source of non-tax funding and find a way to pay for it all. So I make a concerted effort each and every year to minimize the tax impact by knowing what is eligible to use to fund certain projects and then making maximum use of those things. So with things like the Canada Community Building Fund, we've got 5 years of projects, and we're probably a little bit oversubscribed once we hit year number 4. And the same with the amenity fund, which we're showing going into the hole in year 5 unless we have an infusion of new money. The land sale reserve that was slowly used up since the sale of the old fire hall site. We expect to use the last of that this year, and then it's no longer available. Furthermore, we've got the general capital reserve, which we contribute to every year, and making maximal use of that to try and keep it maintained while at the same time keeping a little bit for things that might come up in future years. When we first set up this reserve, we had a fairly ambitious hope that we would accumulate funds for things like building replacement. But this is the kind of reserve where it's open-ended enough that we can use it to defray short-term tax impacts at the expense of longer-term replacement planning. So all this to say that, one more slide please. All this to say that staff have really exhausted all available funding sources. Yes, perhaps there's a tiny bit of tweaking we can do each and every year, but when we come to you, we've minimized the tax increase to the extent we can by using all of our sources. So the Growing Communities Fund, as it stands now, if nothing is rejected from this list of projects, we're likely going to be near the end of that by the end of 2026, and we're supposed to be using it up in fairly short order. So with that introduction that I have done my job to the best of my ability to find non-tax funding, I would like to consider the capital budget according to the 2025 tax-funded capital, moving on to other 2025 capital, and then finally to future years' capital projects. So if we can start with what is a fairly short list of tax-funded items for 2025, totaling $155,000, which represents roughly 1.05% of the tax impact. Most of that is made up from our recurring annual projects, and there are only 4 new projects for this year. With that, I'll open it up to any council questions or recommendations on this list.
I saw Councillor Garnett and Councillor Duck. Councillor Duck, please.
Mr. Hicik, if you could just help me understand, for example, I don't know where they fall, and I didn't see it pop up, but the ferry terminal marine structures and ferry terminal building improvements, there's about $126,000 in 2025. Are those funded through the lease payments we receive from Washington State Ferries?
Yes, all ferry terminal projects are funded from the ferry terminal reserve, and currently that is made up entirely of lease contributions over the years.
So there's no impact on the tax? Yeah.
No, the tax impact we've talked about over the last few years was that eventually we'd have to start contributing some of our own on an annual basis, but that has been deferred for a few years.
Okay, and one other infrastructure one is relative to the pathway between John Place and Beacon West. There are a number of items that add up to about $460,000, and I didn't see where that was being funded, and maybe that comes up later, or just to get an indication of that. And my question to that was just, that's part of the new developments going on 2190 Beacon West. Is there funding coming from that development? Thank you.
If it's not on this list, it has no tax impact. So it would be best to deal with this at the next juncture. However, since you raised the question, those 3 projects related to adjacent to that development, in most cases they cover purely town cost, although one is indicated in the description for that project and the justification that it's possible we might get some funding from that project for one of the components. And if that happens, then the reserve funding that's currently proposed for that project would remain in reserve.
Thank you. Appreciate the clarification.
Councillor Garnett.
I don't have questions, but I'm prepared to move some stuff, if that's okay. Or do you want to stay with the questions for now?
You go ahead, and yeah, if you want to speak to a particular item or you want to make a motion, please go. Please go ahead.
I'll move that the PRK-23-004 Lockside Waterfront Walkway Hedge replacement be deferred. I believe it's, I won't motivate, but that's.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
I'll turn to the mover and seconder.
Yeah, I walk by there every day, and although I understand where staff's coming from for this project, I think we can defer it for a year. 25, 26, 27's in the budget now. It would be 26, 27, 28.
Councillor Duck, as a seconder.
Nothing to add.
Any further discussion? Do staff wish to comment on the need for it, or the, I know it's been considered for some time. This is not the first we've, Ms. Clary?
Staff have no concerns with this recommendation.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor of deferral?
In favor.
That passes unanimously. Thank you. Councillor Duck, did you have another item? Or Councillor Garnett? Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Mayor. Small item, but admin 24-002 staff gym updates. Not a deferral, but just a removal for 1 year.
Do we have a seconder?
Second for discussion.
Councillor Garnett?
Yeah, for me, and I understand the rationale is strong in the agenda, but for me, this is more of a nice to have than a necessity at this point in time, given our budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions through the staff. Is there a fund for this? Is a fund maintained, or?
We added this as an annual tax-funded item last year, so it's $2,500 a year, and it's tax funded, but any savings from previous year would be carried forward to reduce the impact in any given year. There were no savings last year.
Sorry, but last year was the first year of this line?
Last year was when we made it an annual
Right.
recurring item.
Sorry, this had occurred in previous years. Any further discussion? Sorry, the seconder?
No, thanks, Mayor. You asked the question I was asking.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed?
Opposed.
Councillor Garnett, or Councillor Rentoul is opposed. I'm opposed. Councillor Councillor O'Keefe is opposed. It is a tie, and the motion is defeated. Councillor Garnett, did you have another item?
Sounds like it'll go the same way, but I'm going to move that admin 08001 annual workspace efficiency upgrades be deleted for this year.
Second for discussion.
Councillor Garnett.
Same rationale, thank you.
I'll turn to the seconder.
I'm nothing to add.
Mr. Hicik.
Just a point of clarification on that one. The normal annual amount is $5,000, but this year there were 2 additional one-time requests, being replacement of furniture in one of our meeting rooms and an office renovation for one of our managers who currently does not have one. So I'm not sure if the intent is to remove all 3 of those items or perhaps just do incremental ones, because it is good to have some annual funding for things that come up.
I'll turn to the mover for clarification.
The intent was for the whole thing.
Okay. Any further discussion? I'll just speak. I'm not in support of this. I think particularly with the office renovation and the others, it's worthwhile doing them at this time and not deferring them. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Those opposed?
Opposed.
Councillor Rentoul, Councillor Duncan, and myself are opposed. The motion is defeated on a tie. Just for process-wise, given that it was defeated on a tie, if we were a full council at our next budget meeting and council member wanted to reconsider it, I'd be amenable to that. Any further items? Sorry, actually, could you go back to the previous slide, Mr. Hicik? I did have no. Go back again. Sorry, it's back. It might be a few slides. I'll just ask the question, and that was, I believe, the Beacon Wharf maintenance or work has been. It looks like it's been rescheduled to 2027 or 2028. There was a. Yes, I think it was this slide.
The next study is slated for 2026 with the resulting improvements the year after in 2027.
Sorry, I'm referring to the fishing pier. Was that not the yes, Bevan Fishing Pier, 650,000, 2028. Was that not originally scheduled earlier than that? And if staff could speak to why it's now placed in that year?
I believe that follows the plan that was presented to council. It must have been 3 or 4 years ago now, about the Bevan Fishing Pier. So we did do the first round of work this past year, and this is the next phase will be in 2028.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Mr. Hicik, I'll let you advance.
Sorry, are we complete with the tax-funded projects? Can we move to the
It
next?
looks like we are for now. And Mr. Hicik, I'm going to interject. We do have one more item on the agenda this evening, and that is the notice of motion that I'm bringing forward. I don't expect that that will take a long time, but I didn't speak to this at the outset, but we do have another budget meeting scheduled. We've all heard from each other this evening and from staff. So I was thinking of our meeting concluding about 9 p.m. and then continuing at the next budget meeting. And so I just wanted to leave some time before 9 o'clock to do that notice of motion. Mr. Hicik, can you tell us what would be next?
Next would be 2025 capital, that it's non-tax funded, if there are any questions or recommendations around those. And then following that, we would move on to the future years non-tax capital, or perhaps tax-funded capital if you so wish, but I would recommend that that be deferred until year of.
Right. Councillor Gannett.
Thank you, Mayor. I have three questions, three to staff. I'm looking at the small active transportation plan, which we budget $30,000 for, and I was noting that we're planning to do the Frost and Lochside bus improvements, and I was wondering if staff had given consideration to moving up the active transportation number 4 crosswalk enhancement of the pedestrian flashers when that work is done, if that was given any thought in terms of efficiencies and potential savings.
If Mr. DeMar wants to step in, he's more than welcome to, but I believe we're planning to wrap the sidewalk around to connect to the bus stop and then put the pedestrian flashes on at that time, but I will turn it over to Mr. DeMar if he has any comments online.
Mr. DeMar, did you wish to comment?
I just would comment that yes, that is the flashers on that corner, I believe, is on our active transportation priority list for improvements. So we'd be looking at that potentially coinciding with the improvements at the bus stop.
Great, thank you. And if I may, a question around the I believe it's RW or PWG 2401 on page 142. The library, improved library pathway lighting and landscaping. And I was curious as to the, I guess 25,000 would be from us and 25,000 from North Saanich. And I'm curious as to why we would be recovering that cost from our reserve over 10 years as opposed to potentially taking portions of the revenue that's generally generated every year so we could get the money back quicker as opposed to over 10 years. Or is that not an option for us to do that?
With the most current agreement with North Saanich around the library capital, the stipulation is that they no longer pay 50% up front, but we recover the cost by reducing their portion of the net revenues over a 10-year period.
Okay, great. Thank you for the clarification. And my last question is around, excuse me while I just flip to the page number, page 75, the amenity, the amenity fund. And was looking at the balance, and we've spoken to it earlier about potential for amenities through developments over the next 5 years, but showing your slide where it showed, I believe it was at a $300,000 deficit at 2029. So as I recall, this was we originally had a affordable housing amenity fund, which we merged into our general amenity reserve fund. And my concern at the time was that it would be easy over time to spend money on other initiatives that wouldn't be affordable housing. They would benefit the community for sure, but they would not benefit in terms of affordable housing contributions. And noting that Saanich has kept it separate and is now contributing a sizable amount of money to an affordable housing project in their municipality, I'm wondering if we were to be approached by an organization for affordable housing in our community, and if in the future we approach doing initiatives in the housing action plan, how, given the state of this fund and where it is, we would be able to fund such ideas or potential projects.
Through the chair to Councillor Garnett, we wouldn't be able to use it for two purposes, obviously. So it sat as a separate portion of the amenity reserve for a few years, and and we saw no action on the housing front. So the decision was made to use it for amenity projects we were actually looking to complete as a way to use money that we have to fund important projects without tax impacts. So if something does materialize in the coming years that is deemed more important than what we are earmarking the funds for, that is a decision to be made at the time. Right now, the biggest project on the horizon is Beacon Wharf repairs. As an example, Ms. Verhagen was able to work with a developer to get affordable housing without any town contribution, but there could come a time when we are asked to contribute, and that'll be a decision for the council of the day.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you for the question. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. My question is sort of in a similar vein towards housing and what isn't included in the budget. And so my concern had been that in our strategic plan, we have set a priority, which is to implement housing policies and initiatives with a focus on non-market housing. My understanding from staff is that there currently is not anything in the budget that will support that specific initiative. However, and I'll look to staff to make sure that I've understood this right, is that when we did our housing plan last year to submit for the Housing Accelerator Fund, is that staff's view was that if we got funding for that, that would allow us to meet that strategic priority. Because most of the things in that application for the Housing Accelerator Fund were all mostly things to do with supporting affordable or non-market housing. So I just want to turn to Mr. Edwards to make sure that my understanding of that was correct in terms of that strategic priority in our strategic plan. Staff's plan was that the housing plan would support that particular strategic priority.
I'll turn to Mr. Edwards.
That is correct. There will still be some work that is contemplated in this year that does support affordable housing. For example, like the tenant protection bylaw work and meeting the provincial requirements for the amendments to the land use zoning bylaw and updates to the necessary updates to the OCP. So while the longer list that's within the Federal Housing Accelerator grant application won't be tackled if it were unsuccessful immediately, there still is some additional work that will be done. And if we aren't successful with that federal funding, staff will turn their attention to that long list of policy initiatives, like when they have the capacity to do so, and or perhaps bring back some of those items for contemplation for 2026 budget projects.
Okay, so thanks for that clarification. So my concern is that, well, if we get the Housing Accelerator grant, we're good to go. So that would be great. My concern, though, is if we don't get the grant, and knowing that that is one of our strategic priorities, my recollection from the response from staff was out of those 7 things that were in the housing action plan, there would only be one that they would be able to complete out of those 7 items. And so my concern is that if we don't get the grant, the thing that I think the community is wanting most from us, the business community is wanting most from us, is for us to do something about affordable housing, below market housing. So I know that we're waiting to hear from the federal government. We don't know when we might hear from them, hopefully soon. I don't think I would propose it now unless staff thinks it's appropriate. But what I would be wanting us to think about when we go to discuss this again is that if we haven't heard by the next meeting on the budget whether we are getting funding for the Housing Accelerator Fund, that I would be proposing that we make provision in our budget for this and for staff to look into potential funding options for that. So I won't make a motion unless staff thinks it's useful for them to have that information, or you just want to kind of keep it in the back of your head for now.
Mr. Edwards.
My sense from, without having talked with staff about potential funding options for bringing these items into this budget, my sense is that they would be tax funded projects, that there aren't really a lot of other funding options to consider to bring them forward. And additionally, I'll need staff's input on this, but my sense as well is that if we were successful with the Housing Accelerator Fund, the bulk of that work and those projects would not be completed in this year, 2025. It's effectively a 3-year program for which you're able to complete the work that you've identified in your application. And so, again, I would probably be recommending to push those initiatives to 2026 budget process. But I would want to circle back with staff to confirm those.
Yeah, sure. So I think I'm sort of inclined to, let's wait and see what happens in the next 2 weeks. But that's kind of where my thinking is. And I guess what I'd also be curious to find out is, I understand that the Canada Community Building Fund expanded the parameters of things that could be funded. And I thought there was something in there about housing-related initiatives. So not necessarily looking for an answer on that now, but if it comes to having this discussion, that's something I'd be interested in having clarified as a potential funding source.
Thank you, Councillor. I do have a question of clarification. Do staff have any expectation that we would be hearing back in the next 2 weeks in particular?
I doubt that we'll hear in the next 2 weeks, but some rumors that I'm hearing is that the federal government may be looking to expedite funding decisions for their programs. And so I'm hopeful that we'll be hearing back soon, but I think 2 weeks is not likely.
Short window. And sorry, do staff recall the amount of the grant application for the accelerator? Ms. Verhagen.
Oh yes, it was around $4 million. Yeah. So that would be a challenge to fit those things in our budget within the next 3 years.
Okay. No, I just I didn't recall, so thank you. Mr. Hicik.
Sorry, if you'll indulge me, if I could add one thing to that discussion. It's one thing for us to take grant money from senior levels of government who are responsible for housing and use it for us to undertake that. It's another to have a small local government fund it ourselves, and that's a decision we have not made yet. So if and when it does come, that'll be monumental.
Thank you for the discussion. Was there any other items, Council, on this particular slide that wish to discuss? Seeing none, I'll seek consensus if we might end our budget discussions this evening, or does Council wish to continue? And I would, if we do stop at this point, I would proceed with my notice of motion under number 17 on the agenda, or 16 on the agenda. Councillor Duck?
I have a number of questions under general operating, but I've extended those to Mr. Hicik already, and I can wait to the next meeting to hear his responses by email. But I do want to pose one question, and Mr. Hicik mentioned at the beginning of his presentation, and also was brought up in public presentation, is should we be considering reduction of services? You know, we're indicating right now a $240 increase this year, but that's this year. That's over and above last year and the year before. And as was presented in public presentation, we have, a majority of our residents are on fixed budgets or below minimum survival rate. So where do they pay for this? And so I'm concerned about if we continue to elevate the services and we have to raise the taxes to do that. At some point we should be looking at reduction of services and being able to meet what we need to do for the residents to be able to live here and not go beyond that. And I think we have to give that consideration in this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I had that little notation in my comments as well. But I feel that we have a lot more information that we need to be able to bring to the public and that council will need to look at before we would do that on the fly. We did just do a strategic plan, and one of the things, of course, is this notice of motion that the mayor has put forward. And the other thing that I think will be important as the changing realities begin to set in and we begin to get an idea of how permanent some of the changes might be in macroeconomic situation, that the citizen satisfaction survey and the way staff will ask about services and getting a better idea of how our residents really do feel about that. And I think bringing this up now is really important, to bring it up, to start having the discussions, but not to necessarily move on it, so that people really have time to think about it, and that by the time it's done, people feel that the right things were cut back, or they were cut back in the right way, and everybody was actually emotionally prepared for what might need to be done. But I wouldn't propose doing anything at this point in time. I would wait and just kind of really focus on that citizen satisfaction survey going forward and giving us guidance.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll just make a brief comment about reduction of service. We actually have an opportunity through the slides we've seen tonight to potentially reduce service. And I asked a question earlier about a valve replacement, I think, and one of the 2 or 3 of the budget items that were under supplementals tonight were, I believe, $15,000 in the parks budget for Breather Park, $15,000 for 3rd Street, and a dollar amount I can't recall, but in that magnitude for the beacon, or the traffic circle, the new traffic circle. So the question is we've added amenities in our community and infrastructure in our community, and so if we did not approve those as supplementals, what would happen to the traffic circle, the new traffic circle? What would happen to the playground equipment or the drainage or the rest of the park improvements that have happened at Breather? So I was posing a question about why they actually come as supplementals, but it's actually an opportunity for us to consider whether or not we're going to bring those services on, which the community has some expectation of, and which we have to appreciate that when we're making improvements in the community and infrastructure or amenities, that there will be those associated costs. So it's a difficult path going down the road of talking about service reduction, but the first question is what services? I mean, there are essential services that we are not, going to cut back on, but I'll leave my comments there, and we still have our next meeting, but I will turn the floor back to Mr. Hicik to wind up our budget discussion for tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm not sure if there's an appetite this is the last slide on capital, to actually finish capital. If not, or even if so, I would very much like to make a couple of closing remarks based on what I heard in the last 2 minutes, just to set the stage better for what's coming next.
Sure. If you could go to closing remarks.
Okay. So assuming we're going to finish capital next time, we've gone through supplementals, we've gone through tax-funded capital. We talked earlier about having run out of tax mitigation, and if we need to reduce more, the only option is to look at service reductions. And if council's desire is to go there, we would need time to look at options. However, as mentioned by Councillor Duncan, the last community survey did address that issue, and we are planning to ask a similar question this time around. So going back to the 2013 survey, we asked the question about balancing taxation and service delivery. So 57% of respondents were willing to increase taxes to enhance or expand services, or increase taxes to maintain service levels at current levels. That's more than half. Obviously, they weren't looking at a double-digit increase at the time, but we are where we are. And it's important to ask this question before going too far down that road. And yes, I understand a lot of people are on fixed incomes, but we do have tax deferral as an option. It's a way to not have to incur those costs today. And I realize some people might not be comfortable with that, but it does have to be mentioned as an option. So I'm happy to close on that. We'll start next time on non-tax funded capital. We'll have this further discussion about the general operating budget, and we'll move on to utilities. The only other item I had on the agenda tonight was covered in your report about the tax distribution policy and what staff are proposing to do in terms of that. We might not want to get into that today, but if council has had a chance to consider and perhaps weigh in on whether they support staff's position on that, then that would make it easier next time to move forward on that assumption.
Thank you, Mr. Hicik, for taking us through this tonight in a very organized fashion. Just a question for clarification. Staff may have been intending to do this, or you might have been intending to do this, Mr. Hicik, but if your slide presentation and your staff report could be part of the next agenda as well, for the public's benefit, but also for our use having it.
Absolutely. I mean, this time I did get the presentation out prior to the weekend, and it will be all going on the website as an update after this meeting. I will make every effort to have the presentation on the agenda itself for the next meeting.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you again. Councillor O'Keefe.
Just a quick question. In terms of the website, will it be like on the front page? I went there recently to click on budget, and I saw there's something about Bowerbank bike lanes and a few other things, but I didn't see a direct link to budget. So maybe it's there now, but if not, maybe we could pop something up there. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. And so now I'm turning back to our agenda. We have no items under 14 correspondence. We are receiving 7 items of correspondence for information by virtue of them being on our agenda. That takes us to number 16, notices of motion. Just before I proceed with my notice of motion, I just want to cover process, as this doesn't occur very often, or hasn't occurred very often with our council, and certainly turn to Ms. Nelson if I need to be corrected, is that typically when a council member brings a notice of motion forward, it is read that evening at the council meeting, and it then goes to the next agenda. And will actually appear on the agenda, and then council can have discussion. We'll have discussion at that subsequent meeting. But within our council procedures bylaw and within most local government procedures, a council member, when they, after reading in their notice of motion, it's not seconded, it's just read in. That's the process. The council member can request same-day consideration. And in doing so, the council member is making that motion. It needs to be seconded. The mover can motivate as to the rationale for same-day consideration, and then council votes on same-day consideration. And I will turn to Ms. Nelson. Is it unanimous for same-day consideration, or 2/3? Sorry, it's different with different bodies. I think it's unanimous. Yeah, okay. So I'll proceed to read the notice of motion in, and then I will proceed to ask for same-day consideration. So the motion is, council requests that staff report back to a future council meeting on 1, the potential impact of United States-Canada Canadian tariffs to the town of Sydney municipal operations, and 2, report back on the town of Sydney's procurement process and the impact of prioritizing Canadian-made products and services during the Canada and United States trade dispute.
Second.
Okay, doesn't need to be seconded, it was just,
I thought you wanted to move ahead.
well, sorry, it's read in, now I will request, because it's a motion, I'm requesting same-day consideration. Councillor Duck, you seconded, thank you. I'll motivate briefly. I think from what we're well aware of in the media is there's a sense of urgency. I can speak to attending a 90-minute webinar, or sorry, a 90-minute Zoom meeting with other regional districts and mayors in the province of BC, hosted by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM, that they are acting and they are looking to, for example, get legal opinions on what is permitted or not under procurement processes, may have provincial specific legislation. In going around that virtual room, councils and regional districts around the capital region, around the province, around the country, have passed a great variety of motions similar to these, some being more restrictive and in fact may not be able to be carried forward. But they are moving forward. As we've seen, Canadians are acting, businesses are acting. There's a sense of urgency, and there's a feeling that everyone wants to, including local government, wants to do their part as being a part of Team Canada. So that's my motivation for same-day consideration. We can have other discussion. Councillor Duck.
Yeah, I would support this for same-day discussion. I've attended similar discussions with Destination Greater Victoria and South Island Prosperity Project over the last week, and certainly I see the urgency and the need to move forward rather than waiting, especially with March 4th coming up really quickly.
Thank you. Any, Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this forward. In the context of our budget, one of the things I was interested in, and I don't think staff have had an opportunity to look at it, but what, aside from procurement processes, what of the things that we have planned in terms of big budgets or big items, what financially, what the impact would be. So I don't know that we've done that analysis yet. So if we go to do a major project, what the additional cost might be. So, and I presume, is that part of what you're asking for?
That's part of the first motion, the potential impact of the tariffs to the town of Sydney municipal operations, which would be operating in capital.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? None are opposed. The motion carries unanimous. Thank you for your consideration, Council. We'll now look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Duck, second by Councillor O'Keefe. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, staff, very much for all being in attendance this evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Judd. Have a good night.